Chapter 209. Fan Xian began to feel uneasy. Very imperceptibly, he took half a step back. Lowering his head slightly, he used the corner of his eye to sweep a quick glance around the palace. None of the courtiers of the Qi kingdom were extraordinary. What piqued his interest the most was the bead curtain that was slightly swaying beside the dragon throne. The bead curtain reflected the clear light from the pool behind the courtiers. It looked incomparably beautiful. He knew that the Empress Dowager of Northern Qi was behind the bead curtain. After a long time, the Emperor on the dragon throne yawned, seemingly tired of listening. "You have come a long way. You may go and rest." The young Emperor waved his hand. Fan Xian felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. With a face full of smiles, he knelt on the ground again and again. He and his subordinates bowed to the dragon throne again, and then prepared to leave to find the true officials of Northern Qi and quickly get poor Master Yin out. However, the development of things was always unexpected. Master Fan? There seemed to be a smile on the lips of the Emperor of Northern Qi. He looked at Fan Xian and called out softly, "Stay here and chat with me." The officials were surprised. In court, the Emperor had called the envoy Master instead of an official title. It was a bit inappropriate. Fan Xian didn't think of this, but he was shocked. Could it be that the young Emperor knew something? He hurriedly bowed. "It is my first time here, and I do not know how to greet you. I am afraid." No problem. The young Emperor seemed to be easy to talk to. He smiled and said, "I am delighted to learn that it is Master Fan who has come. I have often read the Banxianzai poetry notes, and even the Grand Tutor is full of praise for your talent. Today, the affairs of the state are over. Master Fan, please accompany me for a walk. I have been looking forward to your arrival for a long time. Let Master Fan see the sights of the Imperial Palace along the way." Having said this much, Fan Xian, as a foreign official, did not dare to say anything more. But his heart trembled slightly. The Northern Qi Grand Tutor was Zhuang Mohan's son. Zhuang Mohan had been beaten into a sorry state by Fan Xian in the Qing Palace, and now Fan Xian was praising his talent? The envoys left the hall. Lin Jing looked at Fan Xian worriedly. Fan Xian nodded slightly, indicating that he would be careful. After the officials of Northern Qi had left, the hall seemed even more spacious. One could faintly hear the splashing of fish tails in the pool beside the long platform, and the soft footsteps of the palace maids behind the gauze curtains. The young Emperor, who had been sitting on the throne the entire time, now seemed to relax. He stretched and looked at Fan Xian with a chuckle. He jumped down from the throne and took a towel from a eunuch to wipe himself. He patted Fan Xian on the shoulder. "Let's go. I want to show the immortal poets of the south the immortal palace of the north." Fan Xian grumbled to himself. Who would have thought that the Emperor still had the habits of a child? Just as he was about to follow him to the back of the palace, he heard a cough from behind the curtain of beads he had been secretly paying attention to. The Emperor of Northern Qi was startled. He turned his head with a pained expression and bowed to the bead curtain. "Mother, I am happy to see Fan Xian. I hope you will forgive me for my rudeness." A palace maid slowly pulled back the bead curtain. The sound of beads clinking against each other could be heard. A noblewoman walked out from behind the curtain. Fan Xian quickly lowered his head, not daring to look closely. But his poisonous gaze was still fixed on the foot beneath the curtain. The noblewoman wore a pair of embroidered gold shoes. They looked casual, but they were extremely luxurious. What shocked Fan Xian even more was that right after this pair of shoes, another pair of feet stepped out of the bead curtain. Who in this world would dare sit with the Empress Dowager behind the bead curtain and listen to the conversation between the Emperor and the foreign envoys? His feet were wearing a pair of cloth shoes. The soles of the shoes were made of 1,000 layers of cloth, a very common craftsmanship in the villages. The shoes were black and white, and only the thin and tender heel revealed a trace of festive cloth. This kind of cloth shoe was usually seen in the countryside during the New Year. It was strange to see it in the palace of Northern Qi Kingdom. Fan Xian guessed who the owner of the cloth shoes was. He raised his head in surprise, no longer caring about etiquette. His eyes were calm, but he was secretly on guard. He was looking at Haitang, who still wore a cloth scarf on her head. He had not thought that Haitang would come out from behind the curtain with the Empress Dowager. Fan Xian and Haitang's eyes seemed to collide, and the atmosphere in the palace of Northern Qi became somewhat uneasy. But in the blink of an eye, Fan Xian withdrew his gaze and knelt to the noblewoman next to Haitang. "I, Fan Xian, pay my respects to the Empress Dowager." The Empress Dowager looked at him and frowned slightly. How could this official of the kingdom of Qing be so beautiful? No wonder Duo had to sneak up to the palace to take a look. Could it be that this girl next to her? She waved these thoughts away and nodded slightly. She then said to the emperor, "Your Aunt Master has returned. Since you want to take Sir Fan for a stroll in the palace, you should go with her." The emperor looked troubled. It seemed that he did not want to go with Haitang, but he had to obey his mother's orders. He could only force a smile. When did Aunt Master return to the capital? Haitang moved her cold gaze away from Fan Xian's face and bowed slightly to the emperor. "Your Majesty, I returned to the capital yesterday. My teacher was worried that there were too many wicked people in the capital, so she sent me back to the palace." Fan Xian forced a smile. There were wicked people in Shangjing? Of course, this was referring to himself, who loved to use aphrodisiac. As he walked through the palace of the kingdom of Qi, Fan Xian could not help but think of a very strange saying. It was a remnant of his previous life. Qi people are blessed. Because this palace was truly worthy of the two words, immortal palace, that the young emperor had spoken of earlier. The nobles of the kingdom of Qi who lived in this palace were truly blessed. Tall green trees stretched out from the side of the palace, which was entirely black in color. They were like a cold and meticulous woman fanning someone. The verdant branches playfully peeped out of the black eaves, or rested lazily on the green tiles, or stretched lazily over the gorgeous flowers on the floor of the palace, as if looking down on the delicate plants. The entire palace was mixed with the large green trees that could be seen everywhere, reflecting off each other. Green and black alternated, hard and soft, making for a beautiful sight. The palace was divided into several levels, built around a green mountain. It was a particularly wondrous sight. The three of them walked forward under the service of a large group of eunuchs. They went around a long corridor next to a clear stream in the mountains, and had already reached the second level. Only now did Fan Xian calm down a little. He began to carefully observe the scenery within the palace, and could not help but sigh in admiration. Although the palace was built on a mountain, from the point of view of military or daily life, it was a somewhat foolish choice. But looking at the clear water flowing along the corridor, and the refreshing scenery all around him filled his eyes, Fan Xian finally understood the true reason why people had chosen this place as a palace many years ago. Beautiful, it was truly beautiful. Unfortunately, Fan Xian was not a citizen of the kingdom of Qi, and did not have the blessings of being a citizen of the kingdom of Qi. He did not have two stunning beauties by his side. Instead, there was only the supreme emperor of the kingdom of Qi, and the strongest of the younger generation of the kingdom of Qi, Lady Haitang, who had once beaten him to a pulp. The emperor wore a black robe with a gold-threaded jade belt around his waist. His sleeves were wide, and his attire was rather old-fashioned. With his hands behind his back, he led the way into the palace, as if he had forgotten that it was he who had forced Fan Xian to stay. Fan Xian followed behind the emperor somewhat cautiously. Occasionally, he would glance at Haitang beside him out of the corner of his eye. There was a great enmity between him and this woman. Although he believed that in the palace she would not do anything to him, he still felt somewhat nervous. However, Haitang Duo did not even look directly at him. It was as if she had never met him, had not been poisoned by him, and had not heard his sour words. Fan Xian seemed to understand something, so he smiled warmly and did not say anything. However, the young emperor seemed to have finally grown tired of walking. He pointed at a pavilion on flat ground in front of them and gently tapped his finger. In an instant, a large group of eunuchs charged over without touching the ground. In a very short amount of time, they cleaned the pavilion clean. The railings were wiped over and over again, a few sticks of incense were lit, and clear teapots and cups were prepared. Walking into the pavilion, the mountain wind carried a clear stream of moisture and lightly brushed against them. The emperor stood by the railing with his hands behind his back. In a quiet voice, he said, slapping the railing, "The flowers in the forest blow at my temples, the mountain wind is cold, and the grand song startles the floating clouds away." Fan Xian replied at the perfect moment, "Good words." The emperor turned around. A pair of clear eyes looked at Fan Xian with great interest. A moment later, he suddenly opened his mouth and said, "To flatter me so carelessly, Fan Xian, you must be the first person to do so." Fan Xian was embarrassed and didn't know what to say. He raised his hands in a salute and said, "I am afraid." "It's fine to be afraid, as long as you don't have to be terrified and uneasy." The emperor sat down and picked up a teacup to take a sip. Suddenly seeing Haitang, he couldn't help but smile and say, "Aunt Disciple, why are you so reserved in front of me today? In the past, even if I invited you, I wouldn't be able to invite you. You were only willing to grow vegetables in the garden. Since you have entered the palace today, it is good to relax and enjoy the scenery." He sighed quietly and said, "I have always thought that this palace is too beautiful, so beautiful that I have no desire to leave the palace for a walk." There seemed to be some other meaning in these words, but Fan Xian pretended he didn't understand. Under the emperor's gaze, he sat down. A eunuch brought him tea, which he slowly sipped. He didn't know what the young emperor meant by suddenly wanting him to stay in the palace. Haidang also picked up a cup of tea and sat on the railing outside the mountain pavilion. Her gaze was cast toward the flowing water beside the pavilion. It was unknown what she was thinking. "Fan Xian, what do you think of the scenery in my palace?" Fan Xian was slightly taken aback. How many times had the emperor repeated this topic today? After a moment of consideration, he replied, "The palace is in the mountains, and there are trees on the mountains. The trees are in the palace, and the scenery is clear and beautiful. What is most strange is that the layers of eaves of the palace seem to be one with the entire mountain scenery. It does not appear that the mountain scenery swallows up the majesty of the palace, and it does not appear that the prosperity of the palace weakens the desolate mountain scenery. It actually gives one the feeling that heaven and man are one. I am truly full of praise." Huh! Fan Xian's unintentional words seemed to surprise the emperor of Northern Qi. Chapter 210. At the same time, the emperor and Haitang both looked at Fan Xian with astonishment. The emperor had only asked casually, but Fan Xian had answered with the words, "Unity of heaven and man." It was inevitable that these two top figures in the kingdom of Qi would be greatly shocked. It must be known that of the four great grandmasters, Ku He's sect emphasized the unity of heaven and man, and the natural way of the Tao. However, this wondrous formula had never been passed on to outsiders. For Fan Xian to casually mention it while talking about the scenery was truly shocking. Haitang's calm and bright eyes stared at Fan Xian's face, as if she wanted to see if this world-famous poet had stumbled upon it by chance, or if he had truly seen some truth from the scenery of the royal palace. Fan Xian had no such self-awareness. The so-called unity of heaven and man was a topic he had taught too many times in philosophy classes in his distant memory. He had casually mentioned it, and of course he had not expected it to shock others so much. Looking at the emperor and Haitang's thoughtful expressions, he could not help but feel puzzled. "Did I say something wrong?" he asked. The emperor laughed. "Absolutely, absolutely. How could there be anything wrong? Fan Xian, you are indeed worthy of being called the immortal of poetry. What you casually say is actually the truth. Wonderful, wonderful. The Emperor smiled and looked at Haitang. What do you think of Master Fan's words, Aunt? Haitang bowed. Master Fan speaks of truth from the scenery. You can be said to be a genius. The three of them casually chatted for a while longer, and the matter was covered up. The Emperor suddenly frowned. This is a pavilion on a mountain. I stayed for a long time last month. At that time, the trees were in the pavilion, the moon was in the clouds, and I was above the running water. A cool breeze blew gently all around me, and I felt incomparably happy. I completely forgot the troubles of the world, so I often come here these days, but I can no longer find that feeling. I don't know why. Haitang's expression suddenly became solemn. Your Majesty is the ruler of the kingdom of Qi, and the heart of all the people. The troubles of the world have always existed, and it is difficult to forcibly forget them. Furthermore, Your Majesty is concerned with the safety of the world, and Your Majesty's thoughts affect the good fortune of the people. How can you forget the troubles of the world for a moment of happiness? Your Majesty should always remember that the people of the world are in distress, and treat the troubles of the people as your own troubles. This is what a ruler should be determined to do. The Emperor was enlightened. He stood up and bowed. Thank you for your guidance, little martial aunt. Fan Xian watched calmly from the sidelines. He saw that the Emperor was truly enlightened, and he couldn't help but be surprised. It seemed that this Haitang, who had been tormented by him in the past, had such a high position in the kingdom of Qi. However, he couldn't help but disagree with Haitang's words. Although he didn't show it on his face, a hint of a smile flashed through his eyes. But how could this slight change escape the eyes of a ninth-ranked powerhouse? Does Master Fan have a different opinion? Miraculously, there was no sense of hostility or acrimony in Haitang's question. It seemed more like a normal question. Northern Qi was good at debating, and the art of helping the world, so from the point of view of accommodating other opinions, it was better than the atmosphere of the Qin kingdom. Fan Xian furrowed his brows slightly. Shortly after, he smiled and said, First worry about the worries of the world, then delight in the joy of the world. Naturally, this is the ideal that an emperor and an official should hold. But if, as Haitang says, you cannot forget the suffering of the common people day and night. Although Your Majesty can be vigilant and tireless in government affairs for the good of the common people, in the long run, it will inevitably be too tiring. When your spirit is weak, no matter how many wishes you have, you will not be able to accomplish anything. So I believe that when you can forget your worries, you must completely forget them. As the saying goes, the world is always troubled, but the Son of Heaven cannot always be troubled. His explanation was not convincing, but the beauty of it was in the first two sentences that Haitang's eyes shone even brighter. She didn't listen to the rest of what he said. She just slowly chewed on it. And the Emperor slapped the table and applauded. First worry about the worries of the world, then delight in the joy of the world. Minister Fan's words are indeed the loyalty of an official, and the Son of Heaven should uphold them. Good, good, good. The eunuchs and serving girls around them didn't quite understand what the Emperor was talking about, but seeing that this southern envoy had managed to make the Emperor so happy, they couldn't help but smile and look at Fan Xian with gratitude. Fan Xian smiled and didn't say anything. In his heart, he gave a big thumbs up to that friend of his from his previous life. The young Emperor had already begun to call Fan Xian Minister Fan. It was obvious that the Son of Heaven greatly admired Fan Xian. The Emperor had kept this foreign official in the palace today because he had other important matters to attend to. As for admiring the scenery, it was because Haitang had been placed behind the Empress Dowager. It was not convenient for the Son of Heaven to speak with Fan Xian, so he had deliberately chosen a topic of conversation. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian's response was quite interesting. The Emperor looked at Fan Xian with a smile. Master Fan, you are a master of both the pen and the sword. You are truly a rare talent. Fan Xian repeatedly said he didn't dare. Haitang suddenly said, then according to what Master Fan says, how should one view the way of the heavens? Fan Xian was slightly startled. He was not good at the art of metaphysics. His previous words were already very depressing. Why did he have to continue? The Emperor smiled and waved his hand to stop Haitang's question. Master Fan, why do you think I have been unable to find the clarity of mind I had that night? Fan Xian frowned slightly and looked around the mountain pavilion. He pointed at the stick of incense and said quietly, Your Majesty, move this incense and have the people around you retreat. Perhaps you can find the feeling of that night. The Emperor was slightly surprised. He had the eunuchs and serving girls retreat to a place where they couldn't be seen. He then moved the calming incense. After a while, the cool breeze rose again, dispersing the fragrance. All that was left was a faint sense of emptiness in the mountain palace. The Emperor slowly closed his eyes. After a long time, he revealed a happy expression. He opened his eyes and smiled. Indeed, there is some feeling. Fan Xian smiled and explained, the incense used in the palace is naturally of the highest quality. But compared to the fragrance of this mountain forest, it is inevitably a bit tacky. Haitang nodded slightly to the side, as if she deeply approved of Fan Xian's explanation. He sat in the mountain pavilion again and sipped tea. Fan Xian's doubts grew deeper and deeper. On the second day of his arrival in Shangjing, the young emperor had kept him in the palace. This was greatly against the rules. No matter how you looked at it, he was still a foreign official. Although the face between the two countries was intact, there were always underhanded moves. The emperor suddenly sighed. Master Fan, do you know why I wanted you to stay? Fan Xian shivered slightly. He didn't know if the emperor had seen through his doubts or if it was a coincidence. He respectfully said, Please tell me, Your Majesty. The emperor smiled. Nominally, it is because I like the Banxian's high poetry collection. He then smiled at Fan Xian. Of course, I really do like your poems. Only that Donbo bookstore sells them at a very high price. So last year, I took out some silver from the palace treasury and published many of your poetry collections within the borders of the Qi kingdom, sending them to various academies. Since I value you so much, how will you repay me? This person was the ruler of a country. He thought that if he used the palace treasury's silver to make a name for a young poet, wouldn't he immediately be moved beyond words? Unexpectedly, Fan Xian's expression turned bitter. He dawdled for a long time before standing up and bowing to the emperor. In his heart, he began to curse. There really was no such thing as piracy in this world. You, the royal family, caused Donbo bookstore's northern business to drop by 30% this year. 7 Yi shopkeepers pull their hair out every day, and now I, the owner, have to thank you. Haitang suddenly said quietly, Your Majesty, Donbo bookstore is Master Fan's business. I'm afraid that not only will Master Fan not appreciate your actions, he may even feel a little resentful. Fan Xian hurriedly smiled and explained, Absolutely not. Absolutely not. The emperor looked at Fan Xian with slight surprise. Minister Fan, you are a poet. How can you still do business? Fan Xian smiled bitterly. It's always good to earn some pocket money. Haitang laughed. The largest bookstore in the world can only earn pocket money for Master Fan. The emperor did not know of the story between Haitang and Fan Xian outside Wudu, so he realized that there seemed to be a faint conflict between the two of them. He couldn't help but laugh. Haitang, you and Minister Fan can be said to be the most famous figures of the younger generation in the world, one in the north and one in the south. Why is it that you like to bicker like a child? Haitang was slightly startled. She also realized that her words today seemed to be deliberately harsh. It was very different from her usual contented temperament. Fan Xian smiled and explained, "Perhaps Miss Haitang still thinks that merchants are lowly professions." Although the importance of business had been fully demonstrated, starting from the Yi family, and all the royal families paid attention to it, on the surface, most people still saw merchants as a relatively lowly profession. Unexpectedly, Haitang shook her head slightly. "Workers, farmers, merchants, and scholars, the people of the world do the things of the world. There is no distinction between high and low." Fan Xian liked this way of speaking. It seemed that because the Empress Dowager had Haitang by his side, the young emperor could not say what he wanted to say to Fan Xian in the depths of his heart. Fan Xian and Haitang looked at each other. They had thought that the woman would tactfully leaving him and the emperor some peace and quiet. Unexpectedly, Haitang's expression did not change, and she did not care about the emperor's expression at all. The emperor suddenly laughed self-mockingly. He walked to the side of the mountain pavilion and looked at the flowing mountains and rivers beneath his feet. He sighed. "Fan Xian, on this journey north, what do you think of the Qi kingdom?" Fan Xian replied in a low voice, "Northern Qi has beautiful scenery. The mountains are verdant, the water is clear, the land is vast, and the common people live and work in peace and contentment." The emperor suddenly turned and looked at Fan Xian with a gaze that was completely unlike that of a 17-year-old. "Then how do you think my world compares to the Qing kingdom?" Chapter 211. The comparison between Northern Qi and Qing? This was a sensitive topic. He could not weaken his own country's prestige, and as an envoy, he could not lose too much face to Northern Qi. But Fan Xian's answer was smooth and natural, as if he had been thinking about it since he was in his mother's womb. He spoke confidently, forcefully, and quickly. It made Haitang's face contort in anger, and made the emperor open his mouth wide, revealing his well-kept white teeth. Fan Xian smiled warmly, cupped his hands, and said a few words. "I do not know." The emperor was stunned for a moment, then began to laugh. This reply was a scoundrel, but he could not punish him. After all, he was a so-called foreign official. Even if he knew about the kingdom of Qing, it did not matter. No wonder the young girl was a 9th-level martial artist at such a young age, while he himself had only just crossed the threshold of the 9th-level martial artist. No wonder the young girl was given the title of Tianmai by the people of Northern Qi, while he could only shamelessly rely on poetry to win Jianghu status. No wonder the young girl waved her hand lightly, and he had to crawl on the ground like a dog. No wonder I used my flying needles and aphrodisiacs, while others only soaked in the lake. That is why I came to be influenced. The emperor laughed. With the title of immortal poet here, I will naturally let the students of the Imperial College come and listen to Minister Fan's lectures. Fan Xian felt bitter. He had been a fake professor at the Imperial College of the Kingdom of Qing, and now that he was here in the north, he was a guest professor. "If I go south, what do you think the chances are, Minister Fan?" The young emperor's face was calm, but the majesty he had cultivated in the palace suddenly came pressing in. Only 2 people in the world could ask such a sensitive and arrogant question. But it was an envoy from an enemy country, and the meaning was somewhat interesting. Like a spring thunder, Fan Xian's expression did not change. He replied lightly, "Not a single chance." "Why?" The emperor looked at Fan Xian coldly. "The people of Qi do not want to fight, and they will be in danger." Fan Xian smiled. "The people of Qing are warlike, and they will be in danger. Fortunately, you 2 majesties, one strives to be strong, and the other is experienced in governing the country. You balance these 2 sides." The emperor suddenly asked, "What kind of person is the emperor of Qing? I have exchanged 2 private letters with him, but I still can't understand him." Fan Xian began to curse in his heart. After all, he was an official of the kingdom of Qing. What was the meaning of this? Thus he kept his mouth shut. Seeing him like this, the Northern Qi emperor laughed and said quietly, "Your emperor will grow old, and I will grow up. In the future, when I ride south, I hope Minister Fan can be my minister in the palace." Fan Xian raised his eyebrows and replied in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing, "If your Majesty comes south as a guest, I will certainly compose a poem to congratulate you." They were both heading south, but the meaning was completely different. The Qi Emperor's intention was to lead the army south and swallow up the Qing kingdom. What Fan Xian meant was that the Emperor of Qi was a guest in the south. Naturally, he was a prisoner. He only thought that the young emperor in front of him was indeed a man of great ambition. However, the words he said in front of him were unavoidably a bit too much. He didn't know if it was because he was young and impetuous that he had slipped his tongue or if he didn't take him, a foreign official, seriously at all. He only wanted to use his mouth to pass his will to the southern palace. Suddenly, the emperor's brow furrowed with worry. Thinking of something, he gently waved his hand and said, "Shangjing has always been peaceful, but there have always been many misunderstandings between the two countries. I am worried that there will be people who have ill intentions towards you, Minister Fan. Although those people would not dare to do anything to you, provocations are unavoidable. For my sake, Minister Fan, please be more tolerant." Fan Xian was shocked, not by the content of the words, but by the tone of the young emperor's voice. Be more tolerant, for the sake of the emperor? Fan Xian thought that he had no right to be valued so highly by the ruler of a country, and he didn't understand why the young emperor would think so highly of him. "I am a bit tired. Minister Fan, please return first." The emperor gently patted the railing and turned to look at Haitang, who had been silent all this time. "And master, please escort Sir Fan out of the palace, lest he get lost. In the coming days, if anyone is rude to the Qing diplomatic mission, I will have to trouble you to say a few words." A single word from Haitang of northern Qi was enough to restrain those fanatical nationalists. Haitang bowed slightly and said, "As your Majesty commands." Fan Xian's eyebrows twitched. Did that mean he would have to see this ninth-level woman often? He didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. The emperor suddenly smiled and said, "I hear that Master Fan is no longer composing poetry. I am rather disappointed." Fan Xian smiled bitterly and replied, "Please forgive me, Your Majesty. Poetry is spoken from the heart. Recently I have been feeling restless. I cannot. The emperor raised his eyebrows and looked at him with a smile that was not a smile. He said, "I am afraid it is because of emotion that you write poetry. Fan Xian, you look at me, this impure thing. Naturally you cannot think of poetry." Fan Xian's forehead was beaded with sweat. The emperor suddenly laughed. "Yesterday, the Empress Dowager showed me a small poem. Do you know or not? It should be green fat and red thin." Fan Xian is indeed talented. Fan Xian was embarrassed, and Haitang was even more embarrassed. With Haitang leading the way, Fan Xian left the mountain pavilion and walked along the quiet path toward the dark palace complex in front of the mountain. In the mountain pavilion, the young emperor of northern Qi stood silently. The excitement from the earlier conversation had faded from his face, and there was a faint smile on his lips. The emperor suddenly closed his eyes and took 2 deep breaths. He seemed to have found a trace of the feeling of watching the moon alone that night. Footsteps sounded behind him. The emperor knew it was the eunuchs rushing to serve him. He waved his hand in annoyance and stopped them from entering the pavilion. He continued to stand alone by the side of the mountain pavilion, thinking about something. After a long time, he suddenly sighed and quietly said to himself, "So this is what Fan Xian looks like. Lily should be here by now, right?" On the other side, Fan Xian was silent and nervous as he followed Haitang out of the palace. He was not in the mood to admire the mountain scenery, nor was he in the mood to wave at the cool breeze. He only smiled hypocritically and proudly kept his distance from this strange woman. With his eyes, he could clearly see Haitang's walking posture. Haitang swayed 3 times with each step, But it was not the kind of swaying that women use to seduce men. Instead, it was a very rustic swaying. Her hands were in the pockets of her coarse clothes. Her upper body didn't sway much, but her lower body was dragging her legs as she walked forward on the stone path. She looked extremely lazy, but it wasn't the sexy indolence of a beauty coming out of the bath. Fan Xian squinted for a long time, but still could not understand how she walked. Could it be that she was constantly practicing some kind of natural martial art while walking? Fan Xian was greatly impressed. He had always thought of himself as one of the most diligent practitioners of martial arts in the world. Ever since he started in Danzhou, he had never stopped training at 2 hours a day. But he had never thought that he could train even while walking. No wonder this little girl was at the upper 9th level at such a young age, while he had only just crossed the threshold of the 9th level after working so hard. No wonder this little girl was given the title of Tianmai by the people of Northern Qi, while he could only shamelessly rely on poetry to win his Jianghu status. No wonder this little girl only had to wave her hand lightly, and he had to crawl on the ground like a dog. No wonder when he had used his secret crossbow and flying needles and aphrodisiacs, she had only soaked in the lake water, and then walked away with a confident wave of her sleeves. She did not care about him at all, because she disdained him, she did not hate him. Fan Xian's heart dimmed. This kind of genius, and so diligent, could only be compared to Uncle Wu Zhu, a genius among geniuses. He might not be able to. After watching for a long time, Haiteng seemed to feel the 2 fiery gazes behind her, always staring at her buttocks and waist. Finally, she could not stand it any longer. She quietly turned around and stared into Fan Xian's eyes, as if she wanted to peel off Fan Xian's beautiful skin and reveal his true, wretched self. Fan Xian's eyes were clear, without a trace of distractions. Seeing her turn around, he was slightly startled, knowing that she had misunderstood something. He smiled bitterly. "It's just that the way you walk is strange. You must be practicing martial arts, so I'm very impressed." He was startled, and Haiteng was even more startled. She looked at this young man from the kingdom of Qing with her mouth slightly agape. Her mind was a mess. She had spent most of her life in the mountains and in the palace, and her mind had always been as steady as stone. But for some reason, seeing Fan Xian's detestable and beautiful face, and listening to his random words, she was inexplicably angry. Hearing what Fan Xian said now, she was even more baffled. After a while, she said, "I'm not practicing martial arts." After saying this, Haiteng felt a little strange. Why did she have to explain this to him? So she said with slight anger, "I've always walked like this since I was little. The Empress Dowager has lectured me for many years, but I can't change it. If Master Fan thinks it's an eyesore, why don't you walk in front?" Fan Xian was startled. What was going on? He could only follow Haiteng, who had turned around, and continue walking. But Haiteng continued to drag her feet, her hands clasped behind her back, and she walked forward lazily. Fan Xian tilted his head slightly and frowned for a long time. Suddenly, he understood. What kind of martial arts was this? Wasn't this the most common walking posture of those lazy women in the countryside? When he thought of how a superior 9th-level master, Haiteng, who was like a fairy in the eyes of the world, was actually a village girl, walking in the palace like she was walking in a field, Fan Xian couldn't help but laugh out loud. Chapter 212. Why are you laughing, Master Fan? This was an expected question from Haiteng. Fan Xian coughed twice, his eyes full of smiles as he explained, "I really like the way you walk." Haiteng was slightly taken aback, and anger flashed in her eyes. Fan Xian hurriedly said, "May heaven smite me if I deceive you." Haiteng had no choice but to believe the viciousness of this oath, but she still didn't understand. She had been laughed at by the people of the palace for many years. Why did this young man behind her like the way she walked? Thinking of Fan Xian's shameless methods on the shore of the North Sea, Haiteng was even more confused. The two of them sank into silence once more, walking out of the palace, accompanied by the green trees and black eaves of the mountain. Haitong's position in northern Qi was indeed very respected. Along the way, the eunuchs and palace maids they saw, as soon as they heard the lazy sound of cloth shoes rubbing against the ground, rushed to hide under a tree by the side of the road, and respectfully bowed to the lazy village girl, not daring to look her in the eye. "His Majesty favors me so much that I am a little afraid," Fan Xian finally said, carefully testing the waters. "There is no need to be modest, Master Fan," Haiteng replied expressionlessly. "His Majesty loves poetry." When the Banxianzhai poetry anthology was published, all the scholars of the world had a copy, and His Majesty was no exception. After Zhuang Mohan and Master Qing rebelled against the capital, His Majesty had a long conversation with His Majesty in the palace. From that day on, His Majesty never stopped mentioning Master Fan's name. He often said that if Northern Qi had a talent for poetry like yours, it would be wonderful, and that it would be a great regret. Now that you have escorted Xiao En back to the capital, and the two countries are in a standoff, His Majesty is naturally worried about your safety." Fan Xian was silent. Only now did he realize that there was such a story between this young emperor and him, who he had never met. But the young emperor had a worried expression on his face, and presumably there was something he wanted to tell him. But there were many eyes and ears in the palace, and the emperor did not want to say it in front of Haiteng. He didn't know what it was. "Oh?" Fan Xian furrowed his brows slightly as if he didn't quite believe her words. Haiteng said softly, "Today, Master Fan, when you saw the palace and the forest, you blurted out the words unity of heaven and man. I am impressed. In the future, when you are not busy with state affairs, Master Fan, if you have time, I hope you will not be stingy with your advice." After my master read the Banxianzhai poetry collection, he was silent for a few moments and praised you greatly. "I was a bit surprised at first, but after talking with you today, I know that your reputation is well deserved. You flatter me." Her words were spoken with some sincerity, so Fan Xian responded with even more sincerity. "In the matter of Yanbingyun, I ask for your assistance." "I've never been involved in politics," Haiteng said softly. Fan Xian frowned. "Then why did the girl go to the North Sea alone to kill Xiaoen? Did she not know that if Xiaoen really died, it would have a great impact on this agreement?" Haiteng smiled. "Master Fan seemed to have thought about killing Xiaoen before I made my move. Why did you suddenly change your mind?" "Because I am also very interested in Xiaoen's secret." Fan Xian rubbed his slightly damp hands together and turned his head to look at the vast palace. Haiteng said calmly, "I killed Xiaoen because his secret would cause great trouble for many people." The two of them stopped at the same time under a large tree. The green leaves on their heads were like clothes, blocking out the sun and making for a cool and refreshing scene. Fan Xian looked at Haiteng's calm and steady shoulders and suddenly said, "In this world, there are no secrets that last forever. If Xiaoen were to live, perhaps many people would die." Fan Xian raised his eyebrows. He knew that Haiteng's groundless bemoaning of the state of the universe and pitying the fate of mankind made her seem like a scoundrel in many ways, but he couldn't change anything with just a few words. "His Majesty seems to have something to ask of you, Master Fan," said Haiteng. Fan Xian was slightly taken aback. He knew that she had seen through him as well. After thinking for a moment, he asked sincerely, "What does Miss Haiteng want to tell me?" Haiteng said quietly, "I don't know either. But if it has anything to do with Sea Lily, please let me know, Master Fan." Fan Xian didn't immediately agree. He sank into a slight dilemma. What did the emperor of a great nation want from him? Could it really be Sea Lily? But he had neither the people nor the power in northern Qi. What could he do? Lily is a pitiful girl. Good girl. Haiteng's hands were still in her pocket. "If Master Fan can help, please." Fan Xian thought of all the things that had happened on the carriage to the north. For a moment, he was at a loss for words. So the two of them fell silent again. They slowly walked forward, letting the green leaves above their heads and the sunlight above them dance and weave their shadows. They fell on each other's green robes and flowery garments. Fan Xian suddenly took a few steps forward, walking side by side with Haitang. Haitang tilted her head and glanced at him. She didn't say anything. Fan Xian gradually let go of his worries. He imitated Haitang's country girl's posture. He lifted his chin slightly and looked around lazily. His green robes had no pockets, so he couldn't intervene. He could only put his hands behind his back like an old pedant. He moved his hips forward and relaxed every muscle in his body. He let his seemingly heavy feet drag his body, which felt like it was about to fall apart, along the stone path. Haitang tilted her head again and glanced at him. She didn't seem to understand why he wanted to imitate her walking posture. The emotions in her eyes were complicated. Fan Xian had a warm smile on his face. It was as if he didn't notice her gaze. He walked side by side with her lazily. Haitang couldn't be bothered with this troublemaker anymore. She moved her neck slightly, as if it was very comfortable. Fan Xian also stretched and yawned. The sun was near the middle of the sky, and the sunlight was blazing. The sound of two pairs of feet scraping against the ground gradually merged into one, making people feel sleepy for no reason. The two of them dragged their feet as they walked through the palace. They looked very much like a lazy couple in the countryside, hurrying home from the fields to take an afternoon nap. A drop of sweat seeped out from the tip of Haitang's nose. That ordinary face had a strange charm. The antidote you gave me last time was too strong. It was a bit bitter. Haitang reveled in the sunlight. Fan Xian smiled. He knew that she had seen through his trick that day. He said quietly, "I am the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. I am not a sage who seeks the way of heaven. It is normal for me to use some tricks. I hope you don't mind. Of course, if you really do mind, you can also give me that medicine." His words were a bit frivolous, but Haitang didn't blush like other women. She said lightly, "If there is a chance, I will." Fan Xian sweated profusely. He then heard her say, "You are the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. You walk in the dark. Why is it that after going from Danzhou to the capital of the kingdom of Qing, you have so wantonly shone, just like you are walking in the sunlight right now? The dark night has given me black eyes, but I will use them to find light." Fan Xian continued to borrow the brilliant words of his brother from that world, even though he had died quite a useless and bastard. As expected, Haitang was slightly startled. She tilted her head and looked at him. Presumably, her view of Fan Xian had unknowingly undergone some sort of change. Fan Xian smiled and continued, "Of course, the dark night has given me black eyes. I have more opportunities to use them, to roll my eyes at the world." Haitang finally smiled. As the saying goes, a sweet smile can be seen between bamboo fences. Haitang all over the mountains are vulgar. If the palace walls were bamboo fences, why should I fear the vulgarity of the world? Outside the palace, Fan Xian exchanged a few words with the anxious tiger guards and Wang Qinian. Under the escort of the Northern Qi Imperial Guards, Fan Xian, the head envoy of the Kingdom of Qing, sat in a carriage outside the courtyard. He had just gotten off the carriage when he saw the chaos in front of him. He couldn't help but be slightly surprised. When he took 2 steps toward the main gate of the courtyard and saw the scene clearly, he couldn't help but be greatly shocked. In front of the gate, there were many Northern Qi bailiffs and guards squatting on the ground picking up things. Behind each person was a large sack. Every now and then, they would pick up an item and throw it inside. Judging by the way they were dragging it, it seemed that the item was rather heavy. Fan Xian was very curious. He asked Wang Qinian, who was beside him, "What's going on?" Wang Qinian was also very puzzled. As they walked forward, they discovered that the large open space in front of the courtyard was filled with all sorts of knives. Some were decorated with emerald sheaths, some were simple and unadorned, some were modern, and of course, most of them were the small curved knives that the people of northern Qi loved to carry with them. Fan Xian sucked in a breath of cold air. "Hurry up and snatch those sacks back. Since they were thrown in front of our gate, even if they are to be sold as scrap metal, we will have to earn this extra income ourselves." Today, he had been in the palace admiring the scenery, chatting, and imitating a village girl's walk. He was in a very good mood, so now that he was cracking a joke, he had some of Fan Xi's elegance. Wang Qinian laughed bitterly. "Sir, you really have a good state of mind. You can still joke like this." Fan Xian laughed helplessly. "What else can I do? Do I really have to catch every single knife?" Ever since he had almost been hit in the nose by Yi Ling-er, the daughter of the Jingdo garrison, Fan Xian had come to understand the rules of this world's martial arts duels. Throw a knife at the opponent's feet. If the opponent accepts the challenge, they will pick up the knife. It's only been half a day. Why are there suddenly so many troublemakers? He asked with a frown. Chapter 213. Deputy Lin Jing and Lin Wen, the official stationed in Shangjing, who had been feeling uneasy all this time, saw that Fan Xian had returned and let out a sigh of relief. They slid along the wall to the front of the crowd and explained, "I don't know who leaked part of the agreement between the two countries." The people of Shangjing knew that northern Qi was going to cede land, and they were furious. Although the common people didn't dare do anything, the young nobles came looking for us. They said they wanted to challenge us southerners to a duel, to wipe away the shame of the battlefield. Fan Xian was startled. The northern Qi court would certainly not announce the agreement of exchanging captives and ceding territory to the world. Who would expose this matter? It seemed that the young emperor in the palace was not having an easy time. But he had no time to worry about his #1 fan. He looked at the knives on the ground with a headache. "You deal with this yourself. I'm going to the Ministry of Rights Yamen in a bit." Although there were related subordinates working on the exchange of prisoners, the painting world, and the exchanging of credentials, Fan Xian insisted on dealing with Yan Bingyun himself. "Sir, you can't leave." The two brothers, Lin Wen and Lin Jing, were typical civil officials. The Tiger Guards, who were the strongest in the diplomatic mission, were naturally at Fan Xian's side. The Overwatch Council experts, who used various identities to disguise themselves, only listened to Fan Xian's orders. So the two brothers, who were in the heart of an enemy country, had long been frightened to see the knives flying in front of the courtyard. Hearing that Fan Xian was going to leave, they were afraid that the young nobles of northern Qi would cause trouble again. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and looked at the two of them with disgust. "As an official of the kingdom of Qing, it is best for you to remain calm. Do not lose face for the court. As for those troublemakers, the northern Qi court has arranged for guards to block them. Would they dare let those people into the courtyard? The point is..." Lin Jing was the more familiar with Fan Xian between the two brothers, and he didn't care that Fan Xian's expression was off. "Those people are looking for you, Sir Fan. If you avoid them, I'm afraid that the northerners will think that the kingdom of Qing is weak." Fan Xian laughed and scolded him. "Even if they come to make trouble for me, they will probably be scholars. Master Lin, you were the third ranker. A few words will be enough." Suddenly, he noticed that not far behind him, the royal guards responsible for guarding the diplomatic mission had a strange expression on their faces. Behind him, the Tiger Guard Gao De had already gripped the hilt of the long sword on his back coldly. Fan Xian turned around and saw that there was another group of people at the entrance of the diplomatic mission. At the head of the group was a young nobleman who was looking up at the sky. Since Fan Xian had given the signal, naturally, no one went to stop him. So, the young man walked directly in front of Fan Xian and threw a punch. His fists were fat and powerless, extremely loathsome. Fan Xian unceremoniously slapped him back. The tyrannical Jinqi in his body was one of the most unique in the world, and under Wu Zhu's education, his ability to judge the right timing was even better. This palm strike was like a blade that tore through the air and fiercely slapped onto the fist. Although Fan Xian appeared to be a yes-man in front of Haitang, not even daring to fart when it came to fighting, that was because Haitang was too fierce. In terms of martial cultivation, Fan Xian's level could be considered outstanding among the younger generation of the world. But because of his opponent's young age, he did not intend to injure him this time. The young man, who was probably only 10 years old, fell on his butt and cried out in pain. He probably did not expect that this seemingly weak scholar would be able to push him down so easily. He looked at Fan Xian and cursed. F***CKU, the southern barbarians have gone mad. Fan Xian, who had been about to enter the courtyard, stopped. He smiled and walked back, holding the young man's wrist in a friendly manner. Although the servants next to the young man were nervous at Fan Xian's actions, they saw that he was only supporting their young master. They thought that this young man was probably a follower of the Qing diplomatic mission, so they didn't take it to heart. Instead, they cursed at him. The sound of joints cracking was heard, followed by a scream of pain and countless angry shouts. If mother heard you say this, I'm afraid she would tear you apart, Fan Xian thought to himself. He let go of his hand and looked at the young man sitting on the ground, trying to determine his identity. To be able to make the Imperial Guards of Northern Qi not dare to stop him, it seemed that his family must be of high status. A large group of people gathered around. They were obviously the young man's servants and companions. They saw their young master holding his broken wrist and crying. Only then did they realize that Fan Xian had broken the young master's wrist. They could not help but be angry. They all stood up, ready to teach Fan Xian a lesson. Seeing that things were about to get out of hand, the Imperial Guards hurried over and separated the two sides, saying something to the people on the other side. Those people kept on cursing and swearing, saying things like "southern barbarians" and so on. There was no end to it. Fan Xian pulled Lin Jing over and asked, "Whose family is that brat?" "The young master of Marquis Chang'an's family." Lin Wen was very familiar with the bureaucracy of Northern Qi's Shangjing, so he answered first. Fan Xian was slightly surprised. Hearing the name, Marquis Chang'an, reminded him of Chang Ningho, whom he had once competed with in drinking. Is he also the Empress Dowager's brother? The one who was locked up at home to recuperate after last year's defeat? Chang Ningho's brother? Lin Wen nodded. Because of last year's defeat, Marquis Chang'an was stripped of his power. But this year the Empress Dowager decreed that he would be reinstated, and gradually regained his former arrogance. I suppose this young master saw that the people of Shangjing wanted to cause trouble at the diplomatic mission, so he took the opportunity to avenge me. Foolish brat. Fan Xian shook his head. Without looking at the scene, he prepared to enter the manor where the diplomatic mission was located. You want to leave after beating someone up? Someone shouted angrily from behind him. You dare to beat up the young master of our manor? You must have eaten a leopard's gall. Originally, the commander of the Imperial Guards had the situation under control. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian didn't even say a word and wanted to enter the manor. It appeared extremely unreasonable. The commander couldn't help but feel angry. He thought, the Qing kingdom is too arrogant. Fan Xian slowly turned around and looked at the people of Northern Qi. Everyone, there are many pairs of eyes watching. Your young master ambushed me, and I didn't know he was a child, so I hit him a bit too hard. In a moment, someone will come to your manor to pay for the medical expenses. What are you arguing about? After beating someone up, he wanted to pay for the medical expenses. This was a typical playboy's way of doing things. The problem was that Fan Xian was the head envoy of the Kingdom of Qing, and the boy he had injured was a true playboy of Northern Qi. Fan Xian raised his eyebrows. Lowering his voice, he spoke to the commander of the Imperial Army at the bottom of the steps. "Commander Wei, do you want to see the diplomatic mission and the people of Northern Qi fight each other? Another chaotic war between the two countries?" Commander Wei felt a chill in his heart. Although he knew that things wouldn't develop that far, if he allowed Fan Xian to be beaten up by the crowd and caused a diplomatic incident, he would not be able to escape responsibility. He quickly went down to block the people of Marquis Wei Manor outside. Fan Xian's figure flashed and he entered the courtyard, closing the door tightly behind him. Now, everyone finally knew that the young man who had attacked the boy was the head envoy of the southern barbarians. Seeing Fan Xian hide inside, for a moment, the diplomatic mission was surrounded by curses. Obscenities shot out like arrows, and Fan Xian's ancestors were pitifully used as targets. Not long after, the courtyard door suddenly creaked as it was pushed open. The people causing trouble outside suddenly quieted down. When they saw that it was not the handsome young man who had come out, they shouted and rushed forward, demanding that the Qing diplomatic mission hand over Fan Xian. The official who had come out was Wang Qinian. He smiled and bowed in all directions. Everyone was stunned. They put down the bricks in their hands and prepared to listen to what this man from the south had to say. After a moment, Wang Qinian waved his hand and softly said one word. "Fight!" From behind him, a dozen people rushed out like tigers, holding mops and sticks in their hands. They rushed into the crowd below. As soon as he said this, Commander Wei of the Imperial Guards knew that things were bad. He was about to go up and say something, but unexpectedly, Wang Qinian had already taken him by the arm with great familiarity. He said that if he had time in the future, he would ask Commander Wei to lead the way to various flower alleys to have some fun. With this pull, Commander Wei could not give the order. The Imperial Guards were also dumbfounded. Their duty was to protect the safety of the Qing diplomatic mission. They did not expect that this diplomatic mission would be so strange as to rush out with sticks in their hands. Which side should they protect? With this delay, the empty space in front of the diplomatic mission began to fill with howls like pigs being slaughtered. Sticks danced in the air, and evil slaves wept on the ground. It was a very lively scene. Commander Wei said angrily, "Sir Wang, are you trying to make a big deal out of this?" "Nonsense. Am I the one who wants to make a big deal out of this?" Wu Qinian said angrily, "You're already prepared to have a relationship beyond friendship with the commissioner's mother, even though you're just a little kid who's still wet behind the ears. Let me ask you, on the first day of the diplomatic mission's arrival in Shangjing, why are so many people making trouble? What is the Northern Qi kingdom trying to do?" The one-sided beating continued. Although the dozen or so people who charged out did not carry knives or swords, other than the 4 tiger guards, the rest were all skilled fighters of the Overwatch Council. Beating the servants of these rich and powerful families was a very unskillful thing to do. Cursing the ancestors of the Fan family is fine. Fan Xian and Gao De walked out of the courtyard. Seeing the scene in front of them, they thought to themselves, "Cursing my grandmother and my mother in Danzhou is absolutely not allowed." Chapter 214. After all, no one wanted to make a big deal out of this. After some discipline, Fan Xian waved his hand, preparing to have his subordinates retreat. The Imperial Army began to restore order at the gate. Commander Wei spat on the ground, thinking that the Marquis of Chang'an's family was strange. If they had come to fight, it would have been fine. But why did they send that famous playboy of the capital to ambush them? The world was no longer unified by the Northern Wei kingdom. How could the Qing kingdom's emissary be provoked? At that moment, a vigorous man suddenly walked past. Seeing the bustling scene, he couldn't help but frown. He stamped his feet on the ground, kicking up 2 clouds of dust. His whole body was already in the middle of the field. His fists were straight and his legs kicked horizontally. His moves were clean and efficient, without the slightest bit of hesitation. In the blink of an eye, he had already made 7 or 8 moves, all aimed at the Overwatch Council officials who had yet to stop. The man's punches were simple, but they were fast and deadly. At the same time, the Overwatch Council officials were not able to gain any advantage. They were forced to leave their original positions. A few of the people who were retreating under Commissioner Fan's orders were kicked in the legs. Their bodies swayed and they almost fell. Fan Xian tilted his head slightly, wondering where this expert from the military had come from. He couldn't tell his level of martial arts for now, but he had a natural military aura of bloodlust. He was able to force his subordinates to retreat. After the man had helped the Marquis of Chang'an's family out of trouble, he stood where he was. His eyes narrowed. It seemed that he was surprised that his previous series of fierce attacks had not been able to defeat a single enemy. He could tell at a glance that Fan Xian, who was standing on the stone steps, was the leader. He frowned. "What an impressive diplomatic mission from the Qin kingdom," he said. "Yet all the people they send out are masters of the 6th level and above." Fan Xian looked at him and quietly said, "When traveling to a foreign country, the most important thing is to not lower the prestige of the country. Since you are a military figure, do you not understand this principle?" The man looked at the people on the ground, who were crying out in pain. He frowned. "They are just servants. Even if that child was rude, are you going to rely on that child and the servants to establish your prestige?" Fan Xian narrowed his eyes. "Then in your opinion, should I just let them spit on their faces?" The man was startled. He seemed to have thought of something, and his expression darkened slightly. On the other hand, Commander Wei had long recognized who this man was. With a respectful expression, he stepped forward and saluted. "General Tan, why have you come?" The soldier surnamed Tan did not recognize the commander of the Imperial Guards for a moment. Commander Wei hurriedly said, "I am Wei Wuji." As it turned out, this General Tan, surnamed Tan Wu, was a capable subordinate of Northern General Shang Shanhu. He had always fought the barbarians in the snowy north, and had followed Shang Shanhu back to the capital last year. Who would have thought that he had been idle and without a job, only occasionally going to the Ministry of War to do a roll call? Although his fellow soldiers in the capital admired Shang Shanhu's valiant loyalty and had always respected him, he still felt a little bitter about it. Today, when he happened to pass by, he didn't expect to run into the farce at the gates of the Southern Qi diplomatic mission. Tan Wu glanced at Commander Wei and said helplessly, "How can we let these Southerners run amok in Shangjing?" Wei Wuji smiled bitterly. "The palace has strict orders to ensure the safety of the diplomatic mission. This is a matter of national importance, and I dare not neglect it." Tan Wu thought of the Qi kingdom's successive defeats, and how he and Commander who had never had the opportunity to fight south. He couldn't help but feel depressed. Looking at the wounded on the ground, he felt even more disdain and anger. He suddenly raised his head and saluted Fan Xian, who stood on the stone step. "Dare I ask if you are Fan Xian, the head envoy of Southern Qi?" Fan Xian returned the salute. "I am." Tan Wu's expression was solemn. "I am Tan Wu of Northern Qi," he said sternly. "I ask for your guidance, Master Fan." Having said this, he gently placed the sword at his waist on the ground. Fan Xian shook his head. He knew that this man was not claiming to be an official, and was preparing to fight according to the customs of duels among the common people. "Master Tan," he said quietly, "I have already collected 2 sacks of daggers before you came. If you wish to duel, perhaps you will have to postpone it for a few days." Tan Wu frowned. "There is no time like the present. Please enlighten me, Master Fan." Fan Xian shook his head again. Tan Wu said angrily, "I know that Master Fan is not only talented in poetry, but also extremely skilled in martial arts. Last year, you single-handedly killed Qing Jushu, one of our country's aces. Are you looking down on me?" Fan Xian looked at him and knew that this soldier had been stirred up. He laughed. Although I am the leader of this diplomatic mission, and you really did look like a troublemaking group, I have always respected good men on the battlefield. I knew that you had spent many years fighting the barbarians in the snowy lands of the north. How could I not respect you enough? Why must you decide victory with your fists and feet? Tan Wu was a straightforward man. Hearing the gentleness in Fan Xian's words, his expression softened a little, but he remained stubborn and raised his hands in the air. Fan Xian sighed and shook his head. Don't overdo it, he said quietly to Gauda, who stood behind him. Gauda slowly lowered the long knife on his back to the ground and walked to the bottom of the stone step. He steadily extended his right hand toward this famous and valiant general of northern Qi and made an inviting gesture. Tan Wu narrowed his eyes. He sensed a dangerous aura from this guard, and knew that he was indeed an expert. The southern Qi envoys had sent him out to spar with him, so it was not an attempt to humiliate him. He let out a light breath, crossed his palms, and attacked Gauda. The shadow of the palm moved, and a muffled groan rang out. The collision of the two forces stirred up a cloud of dust. After the dust settled, Gauda's right chest was hit, and a sliver of blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. Gauda's cold right hand had already grabbed Tan Wu's throat. Calluses from years of training scraped against the skin of Tan Wu's throat, making this northern Qi general, who had never known fear, feel a chill. Gauda slowly took a step back and lowered his right hand. Tan Wu looked at this unknown expert, and his heart was filled with shock. The southern Qi envoys had sent a random person who could render him completely powerless to fight back. Earlier, when he had struck his opponent's sternum, he hadn't clearly seen how his opponent's hand had reached in front of him. He knew that if his opponent hadn't been merciful, his throat would have long since been crushed. Tan Wu also knew that if it had been a real fight, this obviously skilled knife wielder would not have given him any opportunity to touch his opponent's body. He bowed deeply to Gauda and then to Fan Xian. After admitting defeat, he left the envoy's door without looking back. It was only a battle of one move, but it was still hair-raising. The carriage followed the streets of Shangjing toward the Ministry of Rites. The carriage was surrounded by soldiers of the Imperial Army, guarding it strictly, not giving anyone a chance to get close to the Qing envoys. Fan Xian sat in the carriage with his eyes slightly closed. He said to Gauda beside him, "Why did you take that blow just now?" Gauda coughed twice and explained, "My opponent is a soldier, so I wanted to be more direct. Also, I didn't want to reveal too much of my strength." He looked at Fan Xian and lowered his head. "And it seems that the young master wants to make friends with this person, so I thought I should do him a favor." Although the Tiger Guards were the Emperor's secret bodyguards, they had been trained by Count Sinan, Fan Xian, for many years. So Fan Xian looked at the 7 Tiger Guards who had accompanied him north the same way he looked at Ting Zijing and the other servants of his family. He looked at Gauda coldly and scolded, "I don't even know how many arms that Tan Wu has. How can I make friends with him? There are many strange people in this world." Tan Wu, aside from having some military bravery, has nothing special about him. Even if he were a strange person, would I have to make friends with him? Then wouldn't I be too busy for the rest of my life? Are you going to let me eat or not? Are you going to let me play or not? Gauda was stunned. Wasn't making friends with the best of every noble family's favorite thing to do? Had he done something wrong? But even if that was the case, what did it have to do with eating or having fun? Fan Xian rummaged in his clothes for a long time before finally finding a pill. He tossed it to Gauda and had him swallow it. Wang Qinian joked, "Is it chun pies again?" Fan Xian said unhappily, "It's medicine for wounds." Gauda took it but still didn't quite understand. "Didn't you say not to overdo it?" Fan Xian laughed and scolded him, "Which finger of yours touched Tan Wu's body?" Gauda was silent. "I don't know whose idea it was for Marquis Chang, Anne's young master, to come and make trouble. Wang Qinyan's thoughts were mainly on what had happened earlier. Logically speaking, since the Emperor of Northern Qi was willing to carry out the agreement this time, and admired the commissioner, he had the imperial guards ensure the safety of the diplomatic mission. This should be enough to send a clear message to all the people in Shangjing. For someone to come and make trouble, this is a little strange. Don't forget, it seems that even the agreement between the two countries has been leaked. Fan Xian lightly knocked on the window of the carriage. Outside were Northern Qi soldiers, so the three of them spoke in very low voices. It seems that Northern Qi is even more of a mess than we are in the south. It seems that the young emperor's grip on power is not firm enough. As long as it doesn't affect our mission, it's fine. He had been rather busy today. He had entered the palace in the morning, then chatted with the young emperor, walked with Haitang, and received a scolding at the gate of the diplomatic mission. On his first day in Northern Qi, he had been so busy that he hadn't even eaten. All he could think about was the cup of tea the Emperor of Northern Qi had given him. It would have been better if he hadn't thought about it, but as soon as he did, his stomach began to growl. Fan Xian laughed at himself, thinking that he really had a hard life. The reason he had been so tired today was because Fan Xian had made up his mind to drag Yan Bingyun out of Northern Qi's icy prison as soon as possible. Otherwise, if he were to eat and drink outside, he might not be able to eat to his heart's content. Chapter 215. The diplomatic mission's itinerary in Shangjing, Northern Qi, had been set long ago. Logically speaking, someone of Fan Xian's status in Shangjing would be accompanied by a corresponding attendant, but Fan Xian was wary of this arrangement. Although there were already officials stationed there to negotiate, he still went to the Ministry of Rites with the permission of the Northern Qi royal family. In the secret agreement, Yan Bingyun was exchanged for Xiao En and Si Lily. The kingdom of Qing had already suffered a great loss, so Fan Xian was anxious to find the other side's hidden executor. But unexpectedly, the nominal minister Shui of the Ministry of Rites, the real vice provost of the Northern Qi Brocade Guard, was hiding from him. It seemed that they wanted to delay for a few more days. Fan Xian was furious. He waved his sleeves and walked out of the Ministry of Rites, ignoring the Qi officials. At the entrance of the Ministry of Rites, Ling Jing had already hurried over from the Chamberlain of Dependencies. He quietly shook his head at Fan Xian. The four of them got back into the carriage. Ling Jing said, "Vice Minister Wei Hua disappeared after leaving the palace. We don't know where he went." Fan Xian sighed. "It's probably the same elsewhere. The Qi people want to delay for a few more days." "What's the point of delaying for a few more days?" Wang Qinian frowned. "They're going to hand him over anyway. I don't believe they can keep delaying." Fan Xian shook his head. "We need to get Yan Bingyun out as soon as possible." "How?" "Go to Wei Hua's house." "Chang Ningho's house," Ling Jing said awkwardly. "That's the Empress Dowager's brother. For us foreign ambassadors to rush over is a huge taboo. It's against the system, and I'm afraid it will cause a lot of trouble." Fan Xian laughed. "It would be best if the Northern Qi Emperor's imperial censors could go to court tomorrow to accuse Chang Ningho of colluding with a foreign country. That would be even better." After the plan was decided, the carriage left the Ministry of Rites. The imperial guards followed, and in the distance, there were spies who looked like passers-by. Wang Qinian sat in the carriage, but he could smell them from afar. He whispered to Fan Xian, "Commissioner, it should be the Brocade Guard following us. In any case, the Imperial Guards are with us. Are they afraid we'll get lost?" Fan Xian whispered, "Ignore them. Most importantly, don't be in a rush to contact the Council's people in Northern Qi. It's not good to bring unnecessary danger to those spies." The secret agents of Northern Qi, who had been ordered by the court to keep an eye on the diplomatic mission, were also curious. After leaving the Board of Rights, these envoys from the south were interested in going shopping, especially on Shangjing's most luxurious and extravagant street, Xiushui Street. The street sold luxurious items such as glassware, which was not something the common people could afford. A secret agent frowned and asked, "Why are these southern barbarians strolling around Xiushui Street?" The subordinate beside him replied, "It's rare for us to go abroad, so of course we have to buy some good stuff back. These southern barbarians are filthy rich now. If we don't buy some glasses, how are we going to explain to our families?" "Idiot!" The spy in front cursed, "All the glass in the world is produced by the Qing kingdom. Why would they need to come to Shangjing to buy it?" There weren't many people on Xiushui Street, but the people walking there were all pot-bellied people. Women with beaded hairpins all over their heads looked like they didn't have much silver in their pockets, but the banknotes were definitely much thicker than the books at home. The shops lined the street, and there was some distance between them, not too far away, not too close, just right. The signboards were even more eye-catching, placed vertically outside the shop. They were painted black with gold characters, but some of the gold characters had gradually faded. The rich owners didn't seem to want to change them. Upon closer inspection, one would realize that the signboards were very old, and the inscriptions were often made by famous people from 100 years ago, or even hundreds of years ago. The reason why the gold characters had gradually faded was that these merchants wanted to deliberately create an old-fashioned, honest atmosphere, and flaunt the aura of a century-old shop. Only the 7 shops in the center of Xiushui Street were different. The signboards were all horizontal, and although they weren't brand new, compared to their surroundings, they seemed much younger. Some of these shops sold glassware, some sold soaps, some sold perfume, some sold cotton cloth, and some sold alcohol. The strangest thing was that there was one shop that specialized in selling toys. A few carriages stopped at the end of the street. They were escorted by soldiers of the Imperial Army, and their stance was even more impressive than that of a first-rank noble. But all the merchants on Xiushui Street maintained their arrogance. No one came out to welcome the guests. They just waited for the 4 people who got off the carriages to walk past one by one. The 4 of them walked all the way into Silk Street and finally stopped in front of the door of the shop that sold cotton cloth. The young man with the most delicate features scratched his head, as if he didn't understand why cotton cloth was considered a luxury item. After entering the shop, the owner explained to the few unfamiliar guests, "Speaking of growing cotton, legend has it that there was a genius with the surname Wang who did it hundreds of years ago. However, the method was gradually lost, and no one used it anymore. It wasn't until 20 years ago, when our old boss was gifted by the heavens, that he was able to pick up this method again. Everyone, please take a look. This cotton cloth is warmer than silk, and it's cheap. It's of good quality, and it's not much worse than the South Qing's capital." The handsome young man seemed to be very interested and said, "Let me try 1 foot." The owner's face darkened. He recognized the young man's Qing accent and cursed, "So it's a fellow countryman. I say, sir, how can we Qing people come to northern Qi to buy cotton cloth? Furthermore, other people buy them in bundles. You, on the other hand, try 1 foot." The young man chuckled and cupped his hands in apology. He left the shop and raised his head to look at the words on the horizontal signboard. He furrowed his brows and said, "This handwriting is really ugly." The owner was furious and scolded. "This was personally written by our old owner. You don't know what's good for you. Get out of here." The young man chuckled and led his 3 subordinates to another shop on the side. This young man was, of course, Fan Xian. The ugly words he spoke of were written by his mother many years ago. The handwriting was not much different from the handwriting on the letter in the box. It was exactly as ugly as the handwriting on the letter. After walking for a while, Fan Xian realized that these shops were all businesses of Qing royal merchants in northern Qi. Of course, many years ago they were all businesses of the Yi family. Just by looking at the things they sold, He knew that his mother must have made a lot of money from the hands of the world's nobles. Walking on Xiushui Street, among the signboards his mother had written, Fan Xian was a little dazed. It seemed that he didn't want to go any further. "Sir, what are we doing here, instead of going to Chongningho's manor?" Lin Jing asked worriedly. Fan Xian was a little surprised. He came to his senses and smiled. "Of course we're here to buy a gift. There's no reason to come empty-handed." As he said this, he had already lifted the corner of his robe and stepped into the largest glass shop. There were all sorts of glass products on display in the shop, all of them extraordinarily beautiful. There were flat wine cups, double-eared cups, and transparent jade pot. They were mainly wine utensils, but there were also all sorts of small utensils, including glass insect boxes, all sorts of chess sets, and even a crystal-clear oil lamp. The whole shop was as dazzling as crystal. Fan Xian felt a faint sense of pride. Although he seemed to have spent most of his time in this world and hadn't done anything earth-shattering, looking at the things his mother had left behind, he couldn't help but think, if someone had already done it, what was there left for him to do? The shopkeeper had already heard their conversation and knew that they were fellow Southerners. He smiled. "Gentlemen, it's not that I don't want to do business with you, but if you were to buy glass in Shangjing, it would be a bit of a loss." Fan Xian smiled. "I know. Shangjing must be a lot more expensive than here in the kingdom of Qing. But I see that Northern Qi's palace uses a lot of glass. Don't they think it's expensive?" The shopkeeper beamed. "Who's the stupidest customer in the world? Of course it's the emperor. I heard that the deal with the Northern Qi Palace was the biggest deal our old master ever made. That amount scared the rest of the world's rich merchants silly." Fan Xian smiled proudly. "You're quite bold to say that. You're in Northern Qi. Aren't you afraid that the officials will catch you?" "I'm not afraid. As long as the kingdom of Qing remains the most powerful country in the world, we merchants will not be bullied wherever we go." Even so, the shop owner still lowered his voice and continued, "The phrase, the dumbest customer in the world, isn't something I can say. I heard from my master, and it was also said by my old boss back then." Fan Xian smiled and suddenly asked, "Is your master a big leaf or a few leaves?" The shopkeeper was startled. He raised his head to look at Fan Xian, as if he couldn't believe that this handsome young man knew so much. For a moment, he forgot to answer. Lin Jing smiled. "This is Master Fan Xian, the head envoy of this diplomatic mission. Although you're far away in the north, I'm sure you know who Master Fan is." "Master Fan?" That was the shopkeeper of all the royal merchants in the coming years. The shopkeeper paled. He quickly lifted his robe and knelt before Fan Xian. Chapter 216. Fan Xian hurried to help him up, but the shopkeeper insisted on kneeling and kowtowing. He then rose and said, "So you are my future boss. I have to kowtow no matter what. Furthermore, you are the head envoy of this diplomatic mission. I am in a foreign country, and even if I wanted to pay my respects to the people back home, I would have nowhere to go." The shopkeeper suddenly came to his senses. He remembered that he had mentioned some taboo names in front of this man from the south. He couldn't help but ask, "Master Fan, what brings you to my humble shop?" Northern Qi was, after all, far away from the Qing emperor, so the merchants here were a bit more daring. That was why they still kept their old signboards and kept mentioning the old boss they were so proud of. Fan Xian looked at the shopkeeper's expression and knew that he was afraid these words would get back to the capital and offend the royal family, who now controlled all the businesses outside of Qing. He smiled and told the shopkeeper why he had come. He wanted the shopkeeper to pick out a few exquisite glass wine utensils. "What are they used for?" asked the shopkeeper curiously. He had originally thought that Master Fan was taking advantage of this diplomatic mission to check out the business he would be managing in the future. He didn't know that Fan Xian was actually planning to buy glass products. Ling Jing explained a bit, and the shopkeeper hurriedly called out his assistants. A few agile assistants listened and hurried into the storeroom. It seemed that the truly high-end goods were not stored in the front of the shop. While they waited, Fan Xian and the shopkeeper began to chat. The shopkeeper knew what Fan Xian wanted to know, and didn't dare to hide anything. He gave him a rough estimate of the number of glass products that Qing had exported to northern Qi over the years. Although it was only a rough estimate, Fan Xian was still somewhat surprised. There was only one glass shop in Shangjing, and its annual revenue was terrifying. It was no wonder that despite the wealth of the kingdom of Qi, they were only on par with the kingdom of Qing in terms of wealth. The shopkeeper suddenly sighed. But for some reason, the goods sent from the capital have not been as good as before, and there is nothing new, so business has been a bit worse. How bad is it compared to when it was at its peak? Asked Fan Xian. About 30% off. Fan Xian pondered for a moment. He knew where the problem was. After the Yi family had been taken into the palace treasury, the eldest princess had full control. Even if that crazy woman was someone with great political wisdom and skill, when faced with something completely new like glass soap, she would probably still be clueless. Since the quality of the glass was poor, there must have been a problem with the ingredients and process. Since the shopkeepers of Qingyu Hall could not do it themselves, there was no way they could make adjustments. But business was only 30% off. It seemed that the eldest princess knew the importance of these businesses to the kingdom of Qing's economy, and did not cause trouble. But business was only 30% off. While they were talking, the young workers had already brought out the most precious glass bottles in the shop. Fan Xian picked one up and squinted at it against the sunlight outside the shop. He found that there was not a trace of impurity in the glass. It was indeed much better than the glass windows in the capital. He couldn't help but smile and say, "These are the ones." The shopkeeper hurriedly called for the shopkeeper to wrap it up. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian waved his hand. "Don't worry." The shopkeeper did not understand what he meant, and could only listen. Suddenly, the shopkeeper looked troubled. Fan Xian had already noticed it. "What is your surname?" he asked. "My surname is Yu," replied the shopkeeper quickly. "An apprentice of Qingyu Hall with the surname Yu?" Fan Xian smiled to himself. "Is there something troubling you, shopkeeper Yu?" The shopkeeper smiled wryly. "Master Fan, these glass bottles were prepared for the Empress Dowager's birthday at the end of the month." Fan Xian was slightly surprised. "Could it be that the nobles of northern Qi ordered these gifts for your birthday? Then I can't accept them. Shopkeeper Yu, please give me a few more." Shopkeeper Yu was surprised. He did not expect such a high-ranking official to be so easy to talk to. He quickly explained, "We didn't order them, because the nobles of northern Qi always knew that our shop always had a few good items. Speaking of which, these glass bottles are not the most expensive gifts. But the rules of the palace treasury are strict. This month is usually a rich month, and if you take these when you report to the south at the end of the month, you will be short a lot of money. I'm afraid that the people of the palace treasury will." Before he finished speaking, Fan Xian understood what the shopkeeper was afraid of. He smiled. "Don't worry, of course they will pay you." Wang Qinian also laughed. "Afraid that the palace treasury will check your accounts? Don't you know that the person in front of you is the future master of the palace treasury?" Shopkeeper Yu stammered as he wiped the sweat from his forehead. In his heart, he thought, even if this Master Fan is the future master of the palace treasury, the problem is that the person in charge of the thousands of businesses in the world right now is not a master. Suddenly, Fan Xian patted his pouch and smiled bitterly. "It seems that I forgot to bring something on this trip to northern Qi." Everyone silently understood. As the head of the diplomatic mission, Fan Xian's trip to northern Qi was naturally a public one. Although he had some spare silver on him, There was no way he would have prepared so many banknotes. Shopkeeper Yu continued to wipe his sweat. Master, if this is official business, then naturally it should be reported to the public accounts. Master, please write a list, and I will send it back to the capital. That should be enough to pay off the bill. A promissory note? That's a good idea. Fan Xian thought to himself. He accepted the brush, ink, and paper that he had prepared earlier. He thought that this shopkeeper Yu was very observant. He had probably seen too many cases of envoys writing promissory note. He scribbled a few lines on the paper, and shopkeeper Yu carefully wrote down the amount of money. When it was Fan Xian's turn to sign, he hesitated. He turned around and asked Wang Qinian, "Does the council have money?" Wang Qinian smiled bitterly. 1/3 of the council's finances are provided by His Majesty, and 2/3 by the Ministry of Revenue, which is your father. In recent years, things have been a little tight. Fan Xian turned to look at Gao. You follow your father, so of course the Tiger Guards are rich. Gao saw the young master looking at him, and his face was filled with embarrassment. Young master, the old master is very strict with the Tiger Guard's finances. Fan Xian sighed and looked at Lin Jing. It seems that I will have to use the name of the office of the Grand Herald. Lin Jing held back a bitter smile. He thought, you are clearly eating the office of the Grand Herald. What else can I say? Anyway, it was all public accounts, so Lin Jing did not feel bad. He even joked, the palace treasury and the external treasury are always inferior to the national treasury. This was very true. Whether it was the palace treasury, which was currently managed by the eldest princess, or the Ministry of Revenue, which was managed by Count Sinan, in the end, it was still the money of the kingdom of Qing. Fan Xian and Lin Jing, the envoy and deputy, confidently signed their names. They glanced at the 2,000 taels of silver on the paper, and then walked out of the glass shop. They did not have any attendants following them, so shopkeeper Yu carefully instructed the workers to carry the precious glass bottles and follow them out. Because Fan Xian did not instruct them to return them to the diplomatic mission, they presumably had other uses for them. As they walked past the toy shop that sold 9 rings in Sherong Road, Fan Xian only glanced at it, his gaze gentle. The shop in front of them sold wine, and Fan Xian walked in first. The shopkeeper had already been informed by his servants that a few high-ranking officials from his hometown had arrived, and was standing at the door to welcome them respectfully. Fan Xian sat on a chair and glanced around. He found that the wine utensils were also very expensive, but they were far inferior to the glass bottles he had bought. He waved his hand and asked the owner to step forward. "What is the best wine?" The shopkeeper's surname was Xing, and he produced a thin, transparent bottle as if by magic. The wine in the bottle was suffused with an extremely alluring red color, rich but not thick. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes. "Grape wine?" he asked in surprise. "Master Fan, you truly are an immortal of wine and poetry." Shopkeeper Xing had long since inquired about the composition of the diplomatic mission from his hometown. He smiled flatteringly. "It is indeed grape wine." He took out a cup and poured some into it. Fan Xian closed his eyes, swirled the open cup slightly, and brought it to his nose for a sniff. Seeing this, not only did Wang Qinian, who had once lived a luxurious life, but even Lin Jing and shopkeeper Xing were filled with admiration. Master Fan was indeed the descendant of a famous family. Fan Xian was no master of wine. He was just putting on a show. He placed the cup on the table next to him. "I'll take this wine," he said. "Pick out some stronger ones." Shopkeeper Xing did not dare to tarry, and hurriedly offered them up one by one. Fan Xian took a sip and frowned slightly. This was not much different from the wine he normally drank. It was far inferior to the sorghum wine Uncle Wu Zhu had made for him in Danzhou, and the tribute wine from the capital. Seeing Fan Xian frown, shopkeeper Xing said in a low voice, "Strong wine is forbidden in the north. Please understand, master." Fan Xian knew that shopkeeper Xing was not speaking the truth. There was nothing in this world that money could not buy. Many of the nobles of northern Qi were rich and powerful, and their hands were never soft when it came to spending money. Shopkeeper Xing must have prepared some high-class goods. Fan Xian did not say much, and only shook his head to show his dissatisfaction. Shopkeeper Xing suddenly looked at him, and then took out 2 more bottles of wine. Fan Xian furrowed his brows slightly. In that glance earlier, this seemingly ordinary boss had revealed an extraordinary expression. Fan Xian took a sip in a small porcelain cup and then frowned. He did not say anything for a long time. Everyone thought that the wine did not taste good. Wang Qinian could not help but ask, "Master, what is it?" Fan Xian took a deep breath, turning the burning sensation in his throat into a thrill of excitement. "Good wine!" he exclaimed in admiration. "Good wine. What is it called?" Shopkeeper Xing smiled. 5-grain liquor. Fan Xian's expression did not change, and he praised again. "Good name." But in his heart, he smiled bitterly. "Yi Qingmei, back in the day you were so free." Having done all this, the 4 officials rose and left. But as he was leaving, Fan Xian noticed that the shopkeeper, whose surname was Xing, was giving him a meaningful look. Thinking back to what he had noticed earlier, Fan Xian stopped and let the other 3 go first. He turned around and followed the shopkeeper to the accounting room in the back. There was no one in the accounting room, and it was strangely quiet. As soon as shopkeeper Xing entered the room, he seemed to have changed into a different person. His entire body straightened, and his expression was solemn. He bowed to Fan Xian, who was sitting on the chair, and said in a low voice, "Xing Huairan of the palace treasury greets you, master." Chapter 217. Fan Xian's expression did not change. He had expected this. Today's trip to Xiushui Street was, on the surface, secondary. The key was to see how the palace treasury was doing in the north. So when he heard Xing Huairan call him son-in-law, he was not surprised. After all, the palace treasury was still managed by the eldest princess, and there would always be some of her trusted aides hidden in northern Qi. For some reason, Fan Xian believed that the eldest princess would send someone to find him, the head envoy of the diplomatic mission. This was not only intuition, but also a judgment of the people of Qing. Whether the people of Qing were virtuous or foolish, they all had a self-confidence and pride that bordered on paranoia. There must be a reason why the eldest princess wanted to let Shaoan go. If it did not have to do with the secrets of the temple, then it had to do with Shang Shanhu, who lived in Shangjing. Now that Shaoan had been sent to northern Qi, the eldest princess would naturally contact her son-in-law, the head envoy of the diplomatic mission, if she wanted to rescue him. But the word son-in-law still struck Fan Xian as absurd. It seemed that his mother-in-law would not like him more and more as she looked at him. Since Xing Huairan dared to call him son-in-law, then he must be the most trusted aide of the eldest princess. Fan Xian looked at him and nodded. "Elder, what do you have to say?" Xing Huairan did not say anything. He only handed him a letter. Sitting in the carriage, Fan Xian squeezed the letter in his sleeve. He had not yet had time to read it, but he was already beginning to feel the weight of the letter. After today's business was finished, he would have to deal with it. Wang Qinian was an expert at tracking, and Gauda was an amazing fighter, but he would be missing someone to help him judge the situation and analyze intelligence. He couldn't help but think of the students he had taken in during the spring examination. Those guys should have been sent away by now. Perhaps they could become officials, but conspiracies were not their forte. Even if he wanted to train Shi Chanli, it would be too late. Fan Xian suddenly had an idea. If he could get Yan Bingyun out quickly, he believed that it would be of great help to the government's plans. At that moment, Wang Qinian respectfully handed over a thin piece of paper. Fan Xian raised his eyes and glanced at it. It was a banknote worth 500 taels of silver. He frowned. What is this? It's a commission from Boss Yu of the glass shop. Fan Xian glanced at it again and said with a smile, You can also get a commission if you make a promissory note. You and Gauda take it and split it. Oh right, leave some for the tiger guards. 500 taels of silver was already a large sum, but Fan Xian had given it away without even looking up. Only a wealthy family like the Fan family could cultivate such a habit. Now that Fan Xizha was a millionaire with an annual income of 10,000 taels of silver, he did not care about such a small sum. Ling Jing smiled and said, Sir Fan treats money like dirt. I am impressed. Fan Xian knew that he was not truly admiring his clean sleeves, but rather that his house was full of gold. He smiled and said nothing. The carriage passed through the quiet and beautiful streets of Shangjing, and finally arrived at the area where high officials and nobles live. It stopped in front of Chong Ningho's manor. Shangjing was similar to the south of Jingdou in the Qin kingdom. The spring wind gently caressed the branches extending from each manor. The sunlight was blocked by the large trees overhead and dispersed. Fan Xian stood next to the carriage and looked at the street. He looked at the stone lions beside the grand doors. For some reason, he was reminded of when he had first arrived in Jingdou from Danzhou. The carriage stopped in front of Chong Ningho's manor, and with the protection of the imperial guards, it made quite a commotion. There were already some people hiding in the shadows and beginning to peep. The servants in front of the manor looked at the carriage in front of their manor and were at a loss of what to do. They did not know whether to go down and greet them, or rush into the manor to inform their master. These servants could all see that the newcomer was dressed very clearly. It was an envoy from the Qin kingdom. Who in this world had ever heard of an envoy coming to the manor of another country's minister? If this was a journey permitted by both countries, then Chong Ningho's manor would have long since made preparations. How could it be so quiet? The concierge swallowed a mouthful of saliva, wondering what the hell was going on. Could it be that these envoys did not understand the rules? Today, the envoy was not on official business, and Fan Xian had carelessly thrown off the accompanying officials from the office of the Grand Herald, so only Commander Wei was from Northern Qi. Seeing that Fan Xian and the others were about to charge into Chong Ningho's manor, Commander Wei became anxious and stepped forward to stop them. Master Fan, you must not do this. Without the permission of the court, an envoy cannot interact with a court official. If Master Fan and Chong Ningho really are on good terms, then you must not go in like this. What if you bring trouble to Chong Ningho? Chong Ningho was Empress Dowager Wei's brother. What trouble could there be? Fan Xian muttered to himself. It would be best if they could bring him trouble. His son had been hiding from him all day. But he smiled and said, It's fine, it's fine. This morning, I spoke to His Majesty in the palace, and His Majesty did not object. Why should I be afraid of people gossiping? Bringing up the Emperor of Northern Qi, Commander Wei was stunned. Did he really have to go to the palace to seek confirmation? At that moment, Fan Xian had already brought his 3 subordinates to the door of Chong Ningho's manor. The gatekeeper hurried forward to greet him. His etiquette was thorough and his words clear. Fan Xian secretly praised them. They were indeed a noble family. Could I trouble you to inform them that my drinking companion from the south has arrived? Fan Xian had finally learned some of the quintessence of this ability to be familiar with people after a year of training in the officialdom and wine circles. The gatekeeper was stunned. The Marquis had indeed gone on a diplomatic mission to the south last year, and he had heard that he had gotten drunk quite a few times in the south. Could it be this young envoy? But he did not dare to immediately inform the Marquis. After all, it was a serious matter for a foreign official to enter the manor. Just as he was in a dilemma, he suddenly heard a sound from the corner door. A man came out and bowed to Fan Xian. The Marquis requests your presence. Fan Xian had not expected the manor to be so easy to enter. Entering the hall, he looked at the middle-aged man in the chair and laughed. He walked over and gave him a warm hug. "I have not seen you for a year, and you are even more elegant than before, Marquis." Actually, last year in the capital, he had only met this envoy from northern Qi a few times. In the end, they had a hearty drink in the palace hall. He only vaguely remembered the man's face. Chang Ningho was the brother of the emperor, and his status was incomparably noble. He had never encountered such a warm greeting. He coughed and said with a slight headache, "I have not seen you for a year, and your reputation is even greater than before. What brings you here today?" "I entered Shangjing yesterday, and this morning I chatted with His Majesty for a while. As a matter of fact, I did not know many people in Shangjing, so of course I had to pay you a visit." Chang Ningho was born with a white face and swollen eyes. He was in his 40s or 50s, and the signs of excessive drinking could not be erased. Fan Xian was close enough to smell the alcohol on him. It seemed that he had been drinking through the night. Fan Xian was secretly happy. It seemed that he had bought the right gift. Not only was Chang Ningho fond of wine and women, but he was also a pedantic fellow. The Empress Dowager had two brothers. One of them, Chang'en, could still lead troops into battle. Although he was a defeated general, he was still better than Chang Ningho. This marquis had been holed up in the capital for many years. It was only because of his stupidity, and because he had the support of his sister, the Empress Dowager, that he dared to invite Fan Xian, the envoy from Qing, into his manor. Fan Xian had come today to get closer to this brother of the Empress Dowager. He also wanted to use Chang Ningho to force out Vice Minister Wei. As expected, Marquis Chang Ning's eyes narrowed into slits as he looked at the fine wine brought by his attendants. Although he did not have a clear identity, the fact that he was the brother of the Empress Dowager was enough to make him look down on everyone in the world. Even if Fan Xian was now the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, he would not take him seriously. It was only when he heard the gatekeeper's report that he remembered the young and beautiful man who could drink. After returning to northern Qi, he had not forgotten about his defeat, so he had invited Fan Xian into his manor. Seeing the fine wine, the Marquis was even happier. He thought that he had a good eye for people. This little Fan Xian was indeed a sensible person. According to the Overwatch Council's intelligence, this Chang Ningho was from a rural village. Although he had studied under Zhuang Mohan, his life in the northern Qi court was not very satisfactory. The officials of northern Qi always believed that he had relied on the Empress Dowager's nepotism to climb up, so not many people looked up to him. His reputation in the court was even lower than that of his son, Wei Hua. That was why this marquis was so fond of wine. In the middle of the day, the manor immediately prepared a table full of good dishes. Chang Ningho pulled a few foreign envoys and began to drink to their heart's content. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes slightly and drank a cup. Seeing the old man smacking his lips greedily, he laughed. "Marquis, when we entered earlier, Commander Wei said that it might be inconvenient for you. What's there to be afraid of?" Chang Ningho scolded. "Do you expect me to close the door and refuse guests? Last year in the capital, you and Xian Chiwu, Xian Darren, accompanied me very well. Today I will accompany you. Who would dare to say anything?" Fan Xian thought to himself that this was fine. After 3 rounds of wine, Chang Ningho's pale face gradually turned red, and his eyes became a little unfocused. He knew that the man had drunk a little too much, so Fan Xian took the opportunity to ask what he wanted to ask. Hearing his words, Chang Ningho was slightly surprised. "Master Fan, you wish to see Provost Shen?" Chapter 218. Fan Xian smiled. "I heard that during the rebellion in Shangjing, you risked your life to leave the palace with a letter from the Empress Dowager. You mobilized the brocade guards under Sir Shen, and only then did you manage to salvage the situation. Since then, Serene has had a successful career as an official, and he has always been on good terms with you, so I would like you to introduce me to him. This was the only glorious event in Chang Ningho's life. Chang Ningho was already drunk, and now his face was flushed. He was even more drunk than before, and his expression was one of pride. But no matter how stupid he was, he could tell that something was amiss. He hiccuped and stared at Fan Xian strangely. Sir Fan, you are an envoy. Going to see the provost of the Discipline Commission. This is somewhat improper. Fan Xian frowned. As you know, there are always many inconveniences for an envoy in a foreign land. He lowered his voice and said, To tell you the truth, I have offended a large number of officials in Jingdo. Even His Majesty could not protect me, so he used this diplomatic mission as an excuse to kick me to Northern Qi. Chang Ningho nodded and hiccuped. His heart was full of sorrow. Last year, when Northern Qi lost the war, all the nobles related to the Empress Dowager were roasted on the stove, so Chang Ningho was demoted and sent home. As the Empress Dowager's brother, he was kicked to the south to sign that humiliating treaty. Fan Xian's offending of a large number of civil officials in the south was truly shocking. The Prime Minister of the South had been removed, the Director of the Board of Rights had been hanged, and 16 high-ranking officials had been executed. The civil service case had caused such a ruckus that even the officials of Northern Qi knew about it, so Chang Ningho believed that Fan Xian was telling the truth. But why do you want to see the provost of the Discipline Commission? Chang Ningho was in a bit of a dilemma. He really did not know what this young official wanted. I want to get rich. Does Master Marquis want that? Hearing the word, get rich, Chang Ningho was immediately interested. Business. Fan Xian filled Master Ho's cup. There was no one else around the banquet, only the old man and the young man. Fan Xian spoke in a low voice, Master Ho, you must have heard that I will take over the palace treasury in the south by the year after next. At least 40% of the treasury's business is sent to the north, so I must build a good relationship with the Discipline Commission, otherwise how can I ensure my safety along the way? Chang Ningho looked at him, his heart filled with shock. He instinctively shouted, You're trying to smuggle. Fan Xian raised his index finger to his lips and smiled. Drinking a mouthful of wine, he said, Marquis, do you think we should do this business? Chang Ningho had already sobered up quite a bit. Half of it was from the shock, and the other half was from the joy. What did the Qing kingdom rely on for its recent rise? Isn't it just the businesses left behind by the Yi family? If he could turn the interests of the southern imperial court into his personal interests, what kind of number would that be? However, Chang Ningho still found it hard to believe. Could this young southern official really be so daring? Chang Ningho thought about it for a long time. If Fan Xian wanted to smuggle, he indeed needed to build a good relationship with the Discipline Commission. As for the drawbacks, there was not a single one. In any case, Fan Xian was greedy for the money in the Qing kingdom's treasury. The northern Qi kingdom would suffer no loss at all. If he smuggled, the prices of those goods would fall, and the palace would save a great deal of money. The Empress Dowager and the Emperor's nephew would probably wake up laughing. Why wouldn't he do something like this that harmed others to benefit himself? Chang Ningho fiercely drank a mouthful of wine. Deal. I'll arrange for you to meet with Old Shin, but what? Fan Xian, I must say this. I must get the palace's approval for this. That won't do. Fan Xian said resolutely and decisively, I have already said enough today. Originally, it was just the three of us getting rich. If the Marquis plays this game, then wouldn't my head be tied to the belt of the Northern Qi court? Chang Ningho knew that Fan Xian's words were reasonable, but he still smiled bitterly. I don't dare to take responsibility for such an important matter. Then please consider it, Marquis, said Fan Xian coldly. Fan Xian said coldly. However, this matter involves the lives of my family, so the Marquis' mouth must be sealed. A vicious look suddenly flashed in Fan Xian's eyes. Chang Ningho saw this look, but the Marquis was not afraid at all. Instead, he laughed coldly and thought to himself, "You, a civil official, actually want to play such underhanded tricks. You're no match for the Discipline Commission." Perhaps Chang Ningho had been shocked by the huge amount of money that could be brought about by smuggling, but he had forgotten Fan Xian's true identity, which was very similar to that of the Discipline Commission. Fan Xian looked at Chang Ningho's expression and knew that his bait today was just about enough. He chuckled and changed the subject. He told Chang Ningho about the conflict between the diplomatic mission and Chang Ningho's manor, and asked Chang Ningho to help mediate. Chang Ningho's mind was occupied with arranging for Fan Xian to meet with Commander Shun, and thinking about how to enter the palace and persuade the Empress Dowager to do this profitable business. Hearing Fan Xian's words, he naturally agreed. "That brother of mine doesn't know how to do proper business," he scolded. "He only knows how to cause trouble. Don't worry, I'll handle this matter." Not having eaten and drank to his heart's content, Envoy Fan left the manor and boarded the carriage, preparing to return to the diplomatic mission. Just then, he suddenly heard the hurried sound of hooves in front of him. It stopped next to the carriage. Fan Xian lifted the curtain and saw that it was indeed the eldest son of Chang Ningho's family, Wei Hua, the Vice Minister of the Office of the Grand Herald, who had hurried back. He couldn't help but smile. It seemed that he had accomplished all 4 of his goals by delivering gifts to Chang Ningho's manor. "Master Fan, what exactly do you want to do?" Wei Hua gritted his teeth and lowered his voice to speak to Fan Xian, who stood by the carriage window. Fan Xian burped, and the sour smell made Wei Hua quickly cover his nose. He smiled and used his palm to clear the air. "Your father and I were drinking buddies in the past. Since I've come to Shangjing today, of course I had to pay him a visit." Wei Hua was both angry and angry. "You are an envoy of a country, and your words and actions will attract attention. If you truly wish to visit friends and relatives, you must do so after the affairs of the country have concluded. Then, the office of the Grand Herald will make the arrangements, or you can request an edict from the palace through the Ministry of Rights. If your sudden visit is noticed by the court officials, how will my father explain it to the palace tomorrow?" Fan Xian laughed. "The Marquis is a free and easy man. He doesn't care about such things. The Vice Minister's elegance is a far cry from your father's." Wei Hua suppressed the anger in his chest and swallowed his anger. "Everyone knows that my father loves to drink. Master Fan, what exactly do you want to do?" The drunkenness in Fan Xian's eyes disappeared, and he looked at Wei Hua calmly. The indifference in his eyes made Wei Hua feel a little uncomfortable. "What do I want to do? I want to introduce a business deal to your father." Wei Hua didn't know what he meant, but his intuition told him that it was extremely dangerous. He placed his hand on the window frame of the envoy's carriage and frowned. "Master Fan, if you have something to say, please say it. I'm looking for you today. You're hiding." Fan Xian looked at him with a faint smile. "I'm looking for the Vice Provost, but he's not at the Ministry of Rights. I'd like to ask, who should I look for?" Wei Hua replied awkwardly, "Aren't the envoys of your country currently in discussion with the Ministry of Rights? The border is being demarcated, and so is the prisoner exchange." Fan Xian looked him in the eye and said coldly, "But as the Vice Minister of the Office of the Grand Herald, you should know what I want to do. Don't think about delaying it any longer. I must see him by tomorrow." Wei Hua said, "The procedures are complicated. Do you think you can see him so easily?" "Fine. I'll come see your father tomorrow." Fan Xian was so angry that he laughed. Drink, talk, and then discuss business. Such a life as an envoy can be considered a happy one. With that said, the carriage began to move. Under the escort of the Northern Qi army, it happily made its way back to the encampment. Wei Hua angrily threw the horsewhip to the servant and walked into the manor. Along the way, he asked when Fan Xian had come and what he had done. After hearing that Commander Wei had accompanied him all the way, his heart calmed a little. Presumably, the Emperor's officials would not be able to use this matter to make a fuss. Entering the reception hall, Wei Hua saw that Marquis Chong Ning was still enjoying his wine. Wei Hua was furious, but he suppressed his emotions and respectfully bowed to Marquis Chong Ning. Seeing that his most promising son had returned, Chong Ningho smiled and said, "Come, come, come. We have a guest today. It's that Fan Xian I've always mentioned. Hey, that kid, he actually managed to get 2 jars of the liquor from the Xiushui Street store." Wei Hua finally couldn't take it anymore. He sighed and said, "Father, he's an envoy from an enemy country. Who knows how many people in the court are watching our Chong Ningho and Chong Ningho families. Could you?" Before he could finish, Chong Ningho was already howling, "What? I'm the Empress Dowager's brother. Can't I have a guest at home? That's no ordinary guest. He's an envoy from the kingdom of Qing." Wei Hua's voice grew louder. "It's precisely because our family is different from others that, for the sake of my aunt's reputation, you shouldn't have let Fan Xian through the door today." For some reason, as soon as Wei Hua became fierce, Chong Ningho softened. He hugged his wine cup, his face full of misery, and said with a sobbing tone, "What face? From the day your aunt entered the palace, your father, I have lost all face. Who am I? I'm Zhuang Mohan's student. But in the eyes of others, what am I? Look at all the years I've been in the capital. Which official in the court was willing to visit me? Those who came to visit me were all those shameless things. I'm sick of them." Chapter 219. "It wasn't easy for an envoy to visit me," Chong Ningho said in a trembling voice. "Son, don't be fooled by the fact that I am the Empress Dowager's brother, but that is Fan Xian, the immortal poet Fan Xian. I am proud of him." Wei Hua's heart gradually grew sour. He knew that although his family lived a life of luxury and had considerable power, in the northern Qi court, which placed great importance on reputation, they had always had a bad reputation. He had endured to the position of Vice Minister of the Office of the Grand Herald and had finally silenced some of the petty people, but there were still people who believed that this was a gift from the palace to the Empress Dowager's relatives. He sighed. He knew that his father had studied under Zhuang Mohan, and was prepared to help the world. But because of his aunt, he could only be an idle marquis. These many years of depression could be washed away with a cup of wine, so he didn't say anything more. But thinking of what Fan Xian had said before he left, he was still a little afraid. "Fan Xian said he wanted to do business with you? He is the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. What business can he do? And what business does he have that requires your presence?" Chong Ningho replied, "I am just a middleman. The person he really needs is Sir Shen." "Uncle Shen?" "Correct. Fan Xian's father is the Minister of Revenue, and he has the status of a fake princess consort. In the future, he will be in charge of the eldest princess palace treasury business. It seems that he intends to do something. If I don't have your Uncle Shen's protection and escort, I won't be able to do this shady business for long." Wei Hua was just as shocked as his father when he first heard this news. His jaw dropped. "Is he planning to smuggle? This is a trap." This was Wei Hua's first reaction. "He has no need to threaten me." Chong Ningho shook his head in disagreement. Wei Hua grew anxious. "You don't know, but there is an agreement between the two countries. Fan Xian is anxious about this matter, and His Majesty wants us to stall for as many days as we can, until the Qing diplomatic mission is anxious. With this, regardless of whether this business is real or not, if you really arrange for him to meet with Sir Shen, we won't be able to escape. If Fan Xian comes looking for me again, how am I supposed to stall?" Do we have to stall because His Majesty says so? Chong Ningho looked at his son. In any case, that person is going to be released. If we can get something out of it, then we should help Fan Xian. What are you afraid of? Your aunt is still in the palace. Wei Hua sighed and didn't know what to say. A moment later, he asked in a small voice, "Do you think what Fan Xian said is true? I really don't understand why he would take such a big risk to smuggle goods into Daki. People die for wealth, and birds die for food." Chong Ningho was still tipsy, and thought he had seen through the hearts of the world. He laughed mockingly. The palace treasury? What a big steamed bun! Unfortunately, it did not belong to the Fan family. Even if his father was the Minister of Revenue in the Qin Kingdom, how much benefit could he get from the national treasury? If Fan Xian really does smuggle the palace treasury goods to the north to sell, do you know how big of a sum it will be? Wei Hua was clever and quick-witted. With a slight frown, he had a rough estimate. Over the past decade, the kingdom of Qing had been supported by the businesses left behind by the Yi family. At the same time, it had earned a lot of money from other parts of the world. If Fan Xian really did have the ability to do such a thing, then the profits that could be made from it would be terrifying. Fan Xian embezzled this kind of money? Wei Hua seemed to have a hard time connecting the legendary Fan Xian with this kind of corrupt person he had just heard. Chong Ningho tilted his face and poured himself another cup of strong wine. He belched. "What do you think? You know, poets also have to eat." Having said this once great scholar of Northern Qi, now a vermin of Northern Qi, lay down on the table and fell into a deep sleep. His body was covered in wine, and there was an unpleasant smell. In the carriage, Wang Qinian looked at Ling Jing, who was pretending to be asleep, and gave Fan Xian a look of disapproval. It seemed that the commissioner should not be so bold as to talk about smuggling in front of a court official. Fan Xian laughed. "You don't really believe it, do you?" Wang Qinian really did believe it, and so did Gouda. If anyone could completely control the palace treasury, they could sell those glass jars for countless times the profit. How could they not be tempted? Fan Xian was not tempted, because to the eldest princess, the palace treasury belonged to the court. And to Fan Xian, the palace treasury belonged to the Yi family. It was his. At least one day, it would completely become his. Stealing his own goods and selling them to the north for a low price? Only an idiot would do such a thing. But the problem was that no one knew Fan Xian's true thoughts. No one knew the historical connection between Fan Xian and the so-called royal merchant of the palace treasury. So everyone who heard Fan Xian's plan thought that the son of the Fan family really wanted to dig out a gold mine that belonged to him alone from the Golden Mountain that was the palace treasury. Fan Xian did not want to dig at all. He just wanted to enclose the entire mountain. Don't pretend to be asleep. Fan Xian yawned, feeling a little tired. Next to him, Ling Jing opened his eyes awkwardly and looked at Fan Xian with some fear. Although he was the deputy, the young official in front of him was not only the head envoy, but also the commissioner of that terrifying yamen of the Overwatch Council. Fan Xian did not shy away from talking about illegal business in front of him. It was hard to say that he would not cause an accident on his way back home. Fan Xian looked at him, amused. He patted him on the shoulder. "Are you stupid? I'm saying it in front of you because I'm not afraid of you knowing. When you go back tonight, write something down and send it back to the capital. Don't worry, the court will understand what I mean. Even if the court didn't understand, as long as the emperor did." Ling Jing forced himself to believe that the young man in front of him would not become the most corrupt official in the history of the kingdom of Qing. He swallowed to moisten his dry throat. "Sir, why did you come to Chong Ningho's manor today?" "First, to build a good relationship with the Empress Dowager of Northern Qi." It seems that the Emperor of Northern Qi is taking care of the diplomatic mission." Fan Xian lowered his head and closed his eyes, feeling sleepy. At the same time, Let Chong Ningho deal with the matter at the entrance of the diplomatic mission. After all, he beat up the precious brat of the Marquis of Northern Qi. It has to be dealt with. Hearing the words, precious brat, Wang Qinian and Gao De smiled at the same time. They felt that Fan Xian was right. So that it doesn't affect the official business of this diplomatic mission. Third, if I want to see Sir Shen, I can only do it through Chong Ningho. Fourth, I want to scare Wei Hua. Whether or not the manor believes the food I threw out, I'm sure he'll secretly speed up the process. Why do you have to go through all this trouble to see Commander Shen? Ling Jing frowned. He's a high-ranking official, different from Chong Ningho. Northern Qi won't allow it. So it depends on what Chong Ningho thinks. Even if he doesn't see him, there's no harm. Fan Xian opened his eyes and yawned again. As for why I want to see him, that's council business. It's not convenient to tell you, Sir Lin. Ling Jing shivered. Remembering Fan Xian's true identity, he fell silent. Fan Xian yawned again. He had been yawning all the way in the carriage. It seemed that he was exhausted. After entering the palace today, he hadn't had any time to rest. What do we do later? Wang Qinian whispered. We're in enemy Shangjing after all. We're in the dark. Should we contact the eyes and ears of the 4th Bureau in Shangjing? I said no. Fan Xian stuffed his fist into his mouth, forcibly stifling the yawn that was about to escape his lip. He replied tiredly, Don't let those spies take risk. It's not time yet. What do we do later? Just sleep. Tomorrow, we'll wait for Wei Hua to take us to see Yan Bingyun. He squeezed the stiff envelope in his clothes, and a trace of worry appeared between his brows. After reading the letter, Fan Xian's palm tightened, and he ruthlessly crushed the paper into pieces. This was a habit he had developed in the Tsang Mountains. The pieces had already become powder. Even if the intelligence experts of the 2nd Bureau of the Overwatch Council collected them, they would not be able to recover them. The letter was written by a man named Huang Yi. Fan Xian had heard of this name before. He was an advisor of the eldest princess in the Li Palace in Xinyang. In the Overwatch Council's most confidential intelligence report, it was made clear that this scholar had an ambiguous relationship with the eldest princess. Save, save, save. I'm not some youth trying to put out a fire. Fan Xian laughed bitterly. Only now did he realize the complicated relationship behind the matter. Chen Pingping clearly didn't know that Shaoan had the secret of the temple, and neither did the eldest princess. So the starting point of their actions was very simple and clear. Chen Pingping wanted Yan Bingyun to return and Shaoan to die because he didn't like the idea of another old enemy in the north. He also believed that this was an excellent opportunity for Fan Xian's growth. The eldest princess didn't care about Yan Bingyun's life or death, but she wanted Xiao En to live and regain control of the Brocade Guard. She liked to see Shang Shanhu and Xiao En, a pair of powerful men, standing between the Empress Dowager and the Emperor of Northern Qi. Looking for an opening, they would make the Northern Kingdom even more uncomfortable. Although he didn't know the eldest princess's overall plan, Fan Xian was certain that his mother-in-law, who was far away in Xinyang, had reached some sort of secret agreement with Shang Shanhu. Otherwise, she wouldn't have invested so much. The eldest princess didn't know about the letter, and hadn't discovered the matter of the night in Guangxin Palace. But Fan Xian was a black-clothed man hiding in the dark. He naturally wanted to keep a respectful distance from the eldest princess, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Now, far away in a foreign country, he received her letter. He couldn't help but feel that it was absurd. After all, what did this have to do with Fan Xian? Chapter 220. News gathered from all sides, through all sorts of channels, gathered in that courtyard in the southwest corner of Shangjing. The diplomatic mission confirmed that Xiao En had already secretly entered Shangjing. As for where he was being held, perhaps only the mother and son in the palace, as well as Master Shun of the Discipline Commission, knew. It was strange to say that the Northern Qi royal court had welcomed Xiao En with great fanfare at Wudu, but the return to the capital was completely silent. Presumably, Shang Shanhu and those who wanted Xiao En dead were still engaged in a tug-of-war. For Fan Xian, Xiao En's life and death were not within the scope of his consideration. To be more precise, once he entered Shangjing, Fan Xian had no way of knowing whether Xiao En lived or died until he had enough confidence to mobilize the hidden forces in the north. Unless Wu Zhu came, or rather, unless Wu Zhu brought the chest to Fan Xian. This was another question that had been plaguing Fan Xian. Why did the usually cold and inhuman Uncle Wu Zhu insist on not entering the north? Could it be that there was someone on this land he did not wish to see? On the other hand, it was clear that Fan Xian's proposal to Chang Ningho was beginning to take effect. That proposal contained great benefits, and it had successfully enticed some people. A meeting with Master Shun of the Discipline Commission had also been secretly arranged. Fan Xian knew that although these things seemed to be secretive, his mother in the palace in Shangjing would certainly be watching all of this from the shadows. She would not completely trust Fan Xian, but he had to try. Fan Xian did not trust him at all, but he had thrown out the bait, and he always hoped to catch something. On the surface, it seemed that Wei Shaoqing was still stalling, but in reality, both sides of the negotiation had already felt that the process was gradually speeding up. Although it was still a little behind the bottom line that Fan Xian had strongly requested, on a fine, sunny day, the Chamberlain of Dependencies and the Discipline Commission secretly issued a joint document, and the diplomatic mission finally had the opportunity to meet with Yan Bingyun. That day, the sky was clear, and there was not a single cloud in the porcelain blue sky. Fan Xian put his hand on the awning, shielding himself from the blazing sun. His lips curled into a smile, and he thought of the opening he often used in elementary school in his previous life. He was very happy and also a little excited. During the journey, before the deal was made, the darkness hidden in the deepest part of his heart had almost made him make certain trades. Fortunately, none of this had become reality. Just as he had said a long time ago, Fan Xian admired this young Master Yen, whom he had never met before. He admired him very much. A son of a high-ranking official was able to give up glory, splendor, wealth, and travel to a faraway foreign country. With great difficulty, he took on the role of a spy on the northern border, and he had done an exceptional job, successfully infiltrating the upper echelons of northern Qi. Just from this, Fan Xian knew that this Master Yen was in many ways more outstanding than he was. The place where Yan Bingyun was imprisoned was a heavily guarded manor on the outskirts of Shangjing. Not far from the manor was a military camp, and both inside and outside the manor were guarded by the brocade guards of northern Qi. Yan Bingyun was imprisoned in a heavily guarded manor on the outskirts of Shangjing. Not far from the manor was a military camp, and both the inside and outside of the manor were guarded by the northern Qi brocade guard. This building was not as antique as the other buildings in Shangjing. It was purely made of hard stone and did not have a courtyard. Looking from the corner tower, one would be able to see all the moving objects on the lawn. It was really a good place to imprison people. Today, Fan Xian had only brought Wang Qinian to visit Yan Bingyun. Gauda belonged to the Tiger Guards, and Lin Jing and Lin Wen belonged to the office of the Grand Herald. They had little to do with the affairs of the Overwatch Council, so it was not convenient for them to come. Wei Hua spoke to Fan Xian calmly. "Master Fan, look at this place. The birds are singing, the flowers are fragrant, the grass is flat, and the wind is soft. Our court treats your people well, doesn't it?" Fan Xian's expression was even colder than his. "Even if it's a paradise, after living here for a long time, it's still just a prison." The vice provost of the brocade guard spoke. "Even if it's a prison, it's still much more comfortable than the dungeons of the Overwatch Council." This high-ranking official of the brocade guard thought of the wretched state the old man had been in when his subordinates had picked up Xiao En at the border. Fan Xian frowned. He hated this vice-provost the most. After the diplomatic mission entered the capital, he should have been the one to liaise with the two sides. Who knew that he would go into hiding? Fan Xian still had not figured out the official positions in northern Qi. He was clearly a member of the brocade guard, so why was the leader called the provost of the discipline commission, while his subordinate spy was called the provost? When he first heard this name, he almost thought that he was from the military. What's the point of talking so much? I want to go in and see someone. Fan Xian looked at the provost coldly. Xiaoan had suffered in the south for 20 years, but after Yan Bingyun had been captured, who knew how much torture he had endured? It was already not easy for him to live this long. Before meeting Yan Bingyun, Fan Xian had already imagined many scenes. For example, Yan Bingyun would be hung on a rack, his skin split open, his fingers pierced by 10 steel needles, his toenails stripped bare, revealing the tender flesh underneath, his smooth skin scorched by a soldering iron, and even his youthful gums had already entered the stage of old age, completely bald. Of course, this was the worst possible scenario. Fan Xian had also imagined that Yan Bingyun might be sitting on a soft couch, surrounded by brocade quilts, with 4 or 5 northern Qi beauties with bare legs and half-exposed breasts surrounding him, feeding him grape. The grape juice dripped onto Yan Bingyun's extremely supple chest, and the beauties next to him carefully dabbed it with a soft towel. Of course, this was the worst possible scenario. There was also a strange imagination that lingered in Fan Xian's mind. Perhaps when he first met Yan Bingyun, he would pounce on him like a wounded tiger, ready to tear him to pieces, snot and tears running down his face as he complained that the people in the council had not cared about his life, and that the people of the motherland had come too late. Of course, this was the least likely scenario. But no matter how he imagined it, when Fan Xian walked into the room, he still felt that the human imagination was quite lacking, and that his own was not that strong either. He looked at the young man sitting on the chair, and opened his mouth slightly in shock. He had not expected Yan Bingyun's current situation to be like this. Vice Minister Wei and the Vice Provost clearly had not expected this either, and they opened their mouths to cry out in surprise. The room was decorated simply and elegantly. There was a large bed, a desk, and a few other everyday furnishings. It did not look like a torture chamber, but more like a home. Fan Xian did not know if Northern Qi knew he was coming and had arranged this at the last minute. His eyes were only fixed on the chair. Sitting on the chair was a young man with a cold expression. This young man was extremely handsome, with thin lips and sharp eyebrows. In terms of physiognomy, he was an extremely fickle person. To everyone's surprise, there was a young lady lying on the young man's lap. The young lady's soft sobs echoed in the quiet room. Fan Xian finally closed his astonished mouth tightly, but his heart was a mess. He smiled bitterly as he thought about how he and his entourage had been so worried about the head spy of the Qin kingdom. How could they have known that in this cell there would be a romantic drama, and not the scene of 007 being tortured as he had imagined? The young man on the chair was Yan Bingyun. When he noticed that a few people had walked in from outside and that 2 of them were wearing Qing official robes, he frowned. Just like that, a cold aura began to permeate the room. This coldness even startled the sobbing girl lying on Yan Bingyun's lap. The girl raised her head in surprise and looked back at the people at the door. Only now did Fan Xian realize that the girl had delicate features, and there was a sense of gentleness between her brows. Presumably, she was the daughter of a wealthy family, but he did not know how she had come to be in such a heavily guarded cell. Miss Shun. Wei Hua was shocked and yelled, "Guards! Escort the young lady out." Shen? Fan Xian frowned again, feeling that things were getting more and more interesting. A few brocade guards rushed in from outside the door. Wei Hua's face was ashen as he scolded. What are you doing? How could you let Miss Shun come to such a dangerous place? The vice provost's face was also full of anger, and he slapped them across the face. After a few slaps, the brocade guards responsible for guarding the important criminals covered their faces and walked to Miss Shun's side, not daring to reach out. Miss Shun? If you still don't leave, don't blame me for being rough. The vice provost bowed to Miss Shun. Wei Hua also walked to her side and advised gently, Little Sister Shun, it's better to return. Otherwise, if Uncle Shun finds out about this matter, he won't beat you to death. Fan Xian's gaze did not meet Yan Bingyun's. He only quietly looked at the girl on Yan Bingyun's knees. This girl's surname was Shun, and to be able to enter the manor that was heavily guarded by the Northern Qi brocade guards, there was no need to ask. She had to be the young lady of Sir Shun's family. But he did not know what relationship this Miss Shun had with Yan Bingyun. Fan Xian smiled bitterly and thought to himself, could it be that our great master Yan is using a honey trap? Miss Shun quietly stood up and looked at Yan Bingyun, who had not said a word. A crazy and vicious hatred slowly appeared in her gentle eyes. Biting her lip, she said, word by word, I only want you to tell me one thing. Which of what you said before was true? Yan Bingyun tilted his head slightly and looked back with his emotionless eyes. Quietly, he said, I am an employee of the 4th Bureau of the Qing Overwatch Council. Miss Shun should know very well that none of what I said was true. Wei Hua glanced at Fan Xian, who had been watching coldly from the side. Afraid that if the young lady continued to speak, these southern officials would laugh at her. He quickly ordered people to drag Miss Shun out. Miss Shun coldly shook off the hands of the brocade guards. Looking at Yan Bingyun, who remained unmoving in his chair, she said miserably, Good, good. What a sentimental Yan Bingyun. Chapter 221. What a sentimental Yan Bingyun. These earnest words were filled with heartbreak and despair. Even Fan Xian, who had a heart of steel, could not help but sigh when he heard this. Wei Hua's face was filled with rage. He looked at Yan Bingyun, who was sitting calmly in his chair, as if he wanted to immediately tear this enemy spy to pieces. Following a series of barely audible sobs, Miss Shun was finally invited out of the manor's cell. Fan Xian sighed again. What a sentimental woman! Even though he said this, he had many doubts in his heart. Even if that young lady was the daughter of Shenzhong, the head of the brocade guard in Northern Qi, and even if Yan Bingyun had some sort of emotional entanglement with her during his years in Northern Qi, who was Yan Bingyun? She was the highest-ranking spy of the Qing kingdom that Northern Qi had captured in the past 15 years. How could they have allowed Miss Shun to walk in and put on a show in front of the Qing kingdom's envoys? Suddenly, he understood what his counterparts in the north were thinking. The cell, which did not look like a prison cell, was much quieter. Sitting in his chair, Yan Bingyun did not stand up. He only poured himself a cup of tea and slowly sipped it. This powerful figure, who had been hiding in Northern Qi for many years, had a frosty expression on his face. He gave off the feeling that he did not care about anything, not even his own life or death. Wei Hua seemed to have calmed down from his earlier anger. He looked at Yan Bingyun and frowned. Mr. Yan, no matter how you look at it, we have been good friends for the past 2 years. We all serve our respective countries, and this is not a big deal. But please remember, there are some things that I can never forgive. After you leave this time, please remember not to set foot in Northern Qi again. His Majesty has already sent a secret edict through Master Shun. If you dare set foot in Northern Qi again, Northern Qi will cut off your head even if it costs the lives of 3,000 cavalrymen. Yan Bingyun half lowered his head, as if he had not heard what Wei Hua had said. His fingers gently played with the handle of his teacup. Ever since his identity had been exposed last year and he had been imprisoned, this great scholar Yun, who had once been a social figure in Shangjing, seemed to have become a natural mute. Today, I am here to see him, Fan Xian said expressionlessly to Wei Hua. Fan Xian expressionlessly said to Wei Hua, I need a specific date. When can I take him back to the diplomatic mission? He can't return to the diplomatic mission, so he can only sneak out of Shangjing. Do you know how many people in Shangjing want to tear your Lord Yan's fresh meat apart? Wei Hua said coldly. Fan Xian shook his head. His Majesty has decreed that I must bring Sir Yan back to the diplomatic mission. As for the cover-up, we will do it. Do you think we want to stir up unnecessary trouble? Wei Hua frowned. He knew that Xiao En and Si Lily had already entered Shangjing. In this secret agreement, the Qing kingdom had already made the first move. They could not delay any longer. Furthermore, Fan Xian's intrusion into his manor had indeed provoked much criticism, but his seemingly absurd proposal had, for some reason, moved the people of the palace, as well as Master Shen, who held a great deal of power in his hands. I'll get the paperwork done right away. Fan Xian nodded calmly and said, Can you make things easier for me? I would like to speak with Sir Yan alone. Wei Hua frowned. If Fan Xian really wanted to discuss something, he could have waited until Yan Bingyun returned to the diplomatic mission. Wouldn't that have been more secretive? After thinking about it, he still had no idea what Fan Xian wanted. He nodded and signaled for the vice provost to leave with him. Only Fan Xian, Wang Qinian and Yan Bingyun, who had his head half lowered and was incomparably cold, remained in the room. Fan Xian had no self-awareness that he was in the prison of an enemy nation's brocade guard. With a warm smile on his face, he dragged a chair and sat in front of Yan Bingyun. Looking at the young man's handsome face, he said, I am Fan Xian. Fan Xian knew that before Yan Bingyun was arrested, he had already entered the capital. As the head of the Overwatch Council in the north, Yan Bingyun must have heard of his name. As expected, after hearing Fan Xian's name, Yan Bingyun's fingers slowly left the slippery handle of the teacup. He raised his head and looked at Fan Xian. But his eyes were full of mockery and disdain, which surprised Fan Xian. Fan Xian? The illegitimate son of the Minister of Revenue, Fan Jian. He grew up in Danzhou, likes to drink, has no talent, that's all. Yan Bingyun spoke again. His voice was soft and gentle, completely at odds with the cold expression on his face. What are you doing here? Fan Xian sighed. I say, Sir Yan, you've been locked up for over half a year. The world has changed a lot. First of all, my father has become the Minister of Revenue. Secondly, the untalented me is now the head envoy of the diplomatic mission. My main purpose in coming to Northern Qi is to bring you back home. For some reason, Yan Bingyun seemed to loathe the name Fan Xian. Fan Xian didn't understand why. Bring me back home? Yan Bingyun slowly raised his head again. He was only in his 20s, but his eyebrows were already mixed with a few strands of silver, giving him a strange appearance. Who are you? Why should I believe you? I am Fan Xian, the Commissioner of the Overwatch Council. Fan Xian knew that as the head of the Secret Service, Yan Bingyun would be very careful. Yan Bingyun must still be wondering whether or not Fan Xian was a Qi spy. So he took the token from his waist and waved it in front of Yan Bingyun's eyes. Yan Bingyun's eyes swept over the wooden token, and he frowned. He knew that this token was extremely difficult to forge, but he still couldn't believe that this man in front of him, who was even younger than him, had become the commissioner of the council. The commissioner was a transcendent existence under the director. The 8 bureaus were not under his jurisdiction, but in reality they were all restricted by him. And during this half a year of imprisonment, Yan Bingyun had long since sealed off his mind. He wouldn't believe anything that seemed unreasonable. He didn't dare take any risks, because any information he revealed could completely destroy Qing's spy network in northern Qi. This was a serious matter, and he had to be careful. Wang Qinian, who had been silent all this time, stepped forward and said quietly, Sir Yan, Sir Fan is the newly appointed commissioner. He came north specifically to rescue you from prison. Yan Bingyun looked at Wang Qinian coldly. You are Sir Wang of the First Bureau? That's right. Facing Yan Bingyun, who had been sitting peacefully on the chair, Wang Qinian did not know why he felt a little nervous. When he thought about how Yan Bingyun had already been locked up for half a year, Wang Qinian did not know whether to admire or pity him. I don't need you to confirm my identity. Fan Xian gently patted Yan Bingyun on the shoulder and smiled. This matter is almost over. You can keep quiet and follow the diplomatic mission back home. Don't speak until you see Chen Pingping or your father. I think that will make you feel more at ease. Hearing this, Yan Bingyun frowned. He knew that this could not be a scheme of Northern Qi. But Fan Xian saw something strange in Yan Bingyun's frown. His face grew cold, and he carefully reached out to Yan Bingyun's collar. Yan Bingyun raised his head and looked at him. There was a hint of ridicule in his cold eyes. You want to see? He asked softly. Yes. Fan Xian calmly grunted. Then he slowly pulled open Yan Bingyun's white robe. The robe was as plain as the clouds and as white as snow. As the cloth separated from Yan Bingyun's body, there was a very faint tearing sound. Yan Bingyun's expression didn't change. Not even his eyebrows twitched. Fan Xian's expression grew unsightly. Underneath the white robe was the horrifying skin on Yan Bingyun's neck. It was covered in red and purple scars. Clearly they were new flesh. It seemed that he had been resting for a long time to recover to his present state. There were so many wounds on his neck alone. One could only imagine what kind of torture Yan Bingyun had endured under the cover of this loose white robe. Wang Qinian cursed a few times. Fan Xian's expression returned to normal. Looking at Yan Bingyun's cold face, he asked, How long has it been since you've been tortured? 3 months, Yan Bingyun replied with a smile. Yan Bingyun replied with a smile. It seemed that this body, which had suffered half a year of terrifying torture, was not his. Fan Xian carefully tidied up his collar and sighed. Northern Qi knew when we would arrive, so they stopped for 3 months. After 3 months, the wounds are still so terrible. Sir Yan, you have suffered. Yan Bingyun looked at him lightly. It seemed that he was not satisfied with the commissioner's words. It seems that your concern is unnecessary, he said coldly. Fan Xian was speechless. He didn't know what to say. He had only wanted to express his concern, but he had been ridiculed as not being professional enough. Before the agreement is confirmed, I won't say anything. Yan Bingyun looked into Fan Xian's eyes. I'm just curious. What method did the court use to rescue me from the hands of Northern Qi? Without waiting for Fan Xian and Wang Qinian to reply, Yan Bingyun took a deep breath. Don't tell me that the court would be stupid enough to trade the grasslands of Qianlong Bay for a useless person like me. Don't worry. Even if I was willing, His Majesty wouldn't be so stupid. Fan Xian shook his head helplessly. He explained the general contents of the agreement to Yan Bingyun. The room suddenly sank into a strange silence. Yan Bingyun lowered his head and didn't speak for a long time. Fan Xian looked at him. Suddenly, he heard Yan Bingyun mutter to himself, using Xiao En to trade for me? Idiot. Yan Bingyun suddenly raised his head and stared at Fan Xian with a mocking and angry gaze. But he still calmly suppressed his voice to a whisper. Chapter 222. Yan Bingyun, who had always maintained an inhuman calmness, was indeed an excellent spy. But the fury he had exploded in that instant was proof of his power and control as the head of the Qin Kingdom's spies in Northern Qi. Faced with the flames of anger shooting out of the prisoner's eyes, even Fan Xian unconsciously wanted to dodge. Yan Bingyun's lips trembled. In a low voice, he spoke quickly like an exploding firecracker. He moved closer to Fan Xian's ear. Is Xiao En still under control? Fan Xian shook his head. After Wudu, he was handed over to the brocade guard of Northern Qi. I suppose he has already entered the capital. Is there any way to kill him? No. Did you get the secret out of his mouth? Fan Xian shivered. He pulled away from Yan Bingyun and looked at him calmly. You know the secret he's talking about? Yan Bingyun looked at the young commissioner in front of him, and a strange smile appeared on his lips. I've been in Northern Qi for 4 years. Naturally, I know that the Northern Qi royal family has always been obsessed with Shaoan, although I don't know the specifics of that secret. For the Northern Qi royal family to place such importance on it, it can't be simple. After a pause, Yan Bingyun suddenly said, Do you know who Shaoan is? Fan Xian nodded and smiled. I believe I know more than anyone else. Yan Bingyun quickly cursed. Since you know, how could you allow such a thing to happen? Fan Xian looked at him calmly. The intentions of His Majesty and the director are clear. Shaoan is old, and you are still young. So in this deal, we have the advantage. Yan Bingyun once again fell silent. He had not expected that because of him, the Qing royal court would be willing to use Shaoan in exchange. But this reality made the commander of the northern spies feel a sense of defeat. Being captured alive by the brocade guard of Northern Qi was already a humiliation, and now the royal court had to pay such a heavy price. Without a doubt, it was even more humiliating. He was very disappointed. His body, shrouded in his white robe, seemed to shrink. Fan Xian looked at him calmly. You are a smart man. Since this matter has already been decided, you must return to the south safely. That way we won't lose too much. Yan Bingyun was cold and speechless. He knew that this commissioner of the Overwatch Council, who had appeared out of nowhere, had said the most correct thing to say. 3 days later, I will wait for you at the mission. Fan Xian smiled and walked out side by side with Wang Qinian. Accompanied by Wei Hua and the vice provost, they boarded the carriage and returned to the diplomatic mission. After returning to the diplomatic mission, the people of the kingdom of Qing gathered together to sort out the events of the past few days. Then they dispersed, leaving only Fan Xian and Wang Qinian. Fan Xian rested his chin on his hand and sank into deep thought. Wang Qinian asked carefully, Master Fan, what are you thinking about? Why did Miss Shen appear there? Fan Xian yawned and continued, This could be Northern Qi trying to mess with our minds, or at least weaken the trust the court has in Yan Bingyun. How could that be? Wang Qinian was puzzled. The imperial court is naturally aware of Lord Yan's methods. Things can always get complicated, Fan Xian said expressionlessly. If someone with ulterior motives wants to do something, this could be a loophole, and there's something else I don't understand. Old Wang, tell me, why is it that when we went to see Lord Yan, he was clearly able to return home, but I didn't see a trace of happiness on his face? Because the price the court paid to have him return home was too high. Wang Qinian had been in the Overwatch Council for a long time, and he was more familiar with the eccentric officials of the council than Fan Xian. He said respectfully, if Lord Yan knew that the court would use Shaoan in exchange for him, perhaps he would have chosen to commit suicide when he was first arrested, instead of waiting until now. Fan Xian seemed to find it difficult to understand the state of mind of these Overwatch Council officials. He frowned and said, could it be an outstanding Overwatch Council official, really? He deliberated for a long time before carefully asking, really is willing to sacrifice himself for the country? Yes. Wang Qinian stole a glance at Fan Xian, and found that his face was only a little confused. He then respectfully said, I admire Lord Yan very much. But as an official of the Overwatch Council, or perhaps as a secret agent of the court, when you first entered the council, you should have been prepared to sacrifice yourself for the country. The secret agents of the council only believe in one thing. For this goal, any method, any sacrifice is permitted. What goal? Everything for the kingdom of Qing. Wang Qinyan's face showed a somewhat fanatical expression. Fan Xian's finger unconsciously wrote something on the table. He had seen Yan Bingyun for the first time today, and found that he had been sitting in that chair the entire time, and his sitting posture was a little strange, like a javelin. Other than his buttocks, there was no other part of him that was touching the chair. It wasn't until he left that Fan Xian realized that Yan Bingyun's feet were chained to the chair. There could only be one explanation for Yan Bingyun's sitting posture. There was no part of Yan Bingyun's body that was unharmed. It was all rotten flesh, which was why he had chosen this posture. Everything for the kingdom of Qing? Fan Xian's frown deepened. So they're all a bunch of idealists. The kingdom of Qing had sent a letter through official channels to the diplomatic mission. Naturally, there were no secrets in the letter, only that the birthday of the Empress Dowager of Northern Qi was approaching, and the court had ordered the diplomatic mission to postpone their return to Qing. After this important matter was completed, they would return. This wasn't a big deal. The diplomatic exchanges between the two countries, and when it came to something like the Empress Dowager's birthday, they would have to join in the fun. Furthermore, being in Shangjing, Fan Xian still had some matters to attend to, so he was happy to stay a few more days. But thinking of his beautiful wife and weak sister at home, he couldn't help but feel a little worried. The Empress Dowager's birthday, and we represent the face of the court. This gift can't be too shabby. Deputy Lin Jing pondered. Why don't we ask one of our subordinates to go for a stroll on Xiushui Street? Hearing the words Xiushui Street, Fan Xian thought of the letter boss Xing had handed him, and shook his head. The waters of Shangjing were deep enough, and the eldest princess still wanted to remotely control the internal strife of a foreign country from Xinjiang. Fan Xian certainly didn't want to get involved in such muddy waters. Then what should we give? Lin Jing began to have a headache over the problem of giving gifts to the palace banquet. Fan Xian already had a plan. With a wave of his hand he said, "When the time comes, I'll write a poem and mount it properly." This sounded arrogant, but his subordinates all nodded their heads. The immortal poet Fan Xian didn't write poetry, and this was something the whole world knew. If Fan Xian made an exception for the Northern Qi Empress Dowager's birthday, it would be a great honor. But Fan Xian's calligraphy really wasn't presentable. Wang Qinian began to come up with a bad idea. Master Yan's status in Northern Qi is that of the great scholar Yun. He is skilled in chess, the zither, calligraphy, and painting. His calligraphy master is Master Pan Ling. Last year in Northern Qi, a Chinese painting could be sold for 1,000 liang of silver. Master Fan will write a poem, and Master Yan will write a letter. With two of the most talented young men of the kingdom of Qing working together, wouldn't the Northern Qi Empress Dowager laugh her head off? Lin Jing and Lin Wen knew that Wang Qinian was Fan Xian's confidant, and thought that this was a good idea. Now that they knew who Master Yan was, they felt that it was a little strange, but for a moment they couldn't figure out what was so strange about it. Fan Xian laughed and scolded him. "Who is Master Yan? I'm afraid the people of Northern Qi want nothing more than to eat his flesh and drink his blood. And you're suggesting that he write a poem for the Empress Dowager as a birthday gift? Aren't you afraid that when the Empress Dowager opens the scroll, she'll die of anger and the palace will become a funeral?" Wang Qinian was embarrassed. Only now did he realize that his suggestion was indeed absurd. He laughed. "If we can anger the Northern Qi Empress Dowager to death, it'll be a good story for the council." Fan Xian didn't pay attention to the middle-aged man's dry joke. He sank into deep thought. It was clear that if Yan Bingyun returned to the kingdom of Qing safely, with the foundation he had built in Northern Qi over the past 4 years and a year in prison, Yan Bingyun would immediately rise in the Overwatch Council. His father, Yan Ruohai, was the head of the 4th Bureau, and the 1st Bureau's position had always been vacant. Everyone in the council knew that Director Chen had left the position of head of the 1st Bureau for the imprisoned Yan Bingyun. And if nothing unexpected happened, Fan Xian would gradually begin to take over everything in the Overwatch Council, after Chen Pingping died. And Fan Xian knew that that day might be far away, or it might be very, very near. If Fan Xian wanted to firmly control the Overwatch Council in his hands, then the 8 bureaus were people he had to control. This was Fan Xian's greatest weakness. Other than the 3rd and 8th bureaus, he basically had no trusted aides in the Overwatch Council. He had originally thought that on this trip north, he could win Yan Bingyun's friendship, and thus gain the support of the 1st and 4th bureaus. Unexpectedly, upon seeing him for the first time, Fan Xian could clearly sense that Yan Bingyun seemed to have some faint hostility toward him. Why was this? Fortunately, Yan Bingyun didn't seem to want to hide this hostility, which made Fan Xian feel a little more at ease. "Master, it's time," Wang Qinian reminded him in a quiet voice. Fan Xian nodded and stood up to leave the courtyard. Behind him, the 2 brothers, Lin Jing and Lin Wen, looked at each other, unsure of where the envoy was going today. Outside the courtyard, Chang Ningho's family was waiting. Some people in the palace had already spoken, so the imperial guards responsible for the diplomatic mission's protection tacitly agreed to let those in embroidered clothing take over their duties. They guarded the carriage as it drove toward Taiping Alley, the busiest street in Shangjing, northern Qi. It was drizzling, and in the blink of an eye, the carriage's tracks were swallowed up. Fan Xian, the commissioner of the Overwatch Council of the Kingdom of Qing, was going to meet with Shen Zhong of the provost of the Brocade Guard of the Kingdom of Qi. A meeting between secret agents was always mysterious. Chapter 223. Raindrops hit the roof of the carriage with a dull thud. Fan Xian closed his eyes to rest. He didn't know how long they had been traveling, but he found that the carriage had finally stopped. Fan Xian opened the door of the carriage with one hand and smiled slightly. He stepped out into the rain, only to find that there was an umbrella over his head, shielding him from the wind and rain. Only the cold of spring in the alley around him seeped in through the umbrella. Wang Qinian, dressed in black, held the umbrella over Fan Xian's head. Behind him, the 7 tiger guards carried long knives on their backs, silently lined up on either side of Fan Xian. Fan Xian wore a dark-colored cloak with a plain-colored robe underneath. Hidden underneath was the nocturnal clothes he had prepared before leaving the capital. His plain clothes exuded a murderous aura. Paired with his handsome face, he looked incomparably spirited. "Commissioner Fan, this way, please." The brocade guard responsible for leading the way expressionlessly extended his hand and led them into a courtyard. The courtyard was in a side alley. Fan Xian tilted his head slightly and could faintly hear the bustle in front of him. He smiled and said, "Looks like it's the back courtyard of a brothel." The brocade guard's expression froze for a moment, then he replied with a smile, "Commissioner, your hearing is amazing. This is the back courtyard of Panchalin. Master Shun likes to entertain guests here." Fan Xian knew of Panchalin. According to legend, it was the most exclusive place in northern Qi. The first founding emperor of northern Qi had been a frequent visitor here. He smiled and nodded. He stepped on the puddles of water on the stone slabs and walked into the back courtyard. The courtyard was filled with layers of bamboo and layers of fake mountains. Brocade guard spies could be seen everywhere. These people were clearly guards, and they did not deliberately hide themselves. Along the way, Wang Qinian held the umbrella, and the 7 tiger guards followed silently. With Fan Xian at the front, they walked coldly and confidently into the depths of the courtyard. Along the way, seeing this group of people from an enemy country in the south, the brocade guards could not help but be surprised. They were surprised at the other party's courage and surprised at the youth of the important figure in front of them. With a swish, Wang Qinian closed the umbrella and silently retreated behind Fan Xian. Fan Xian held his hands behind his back and narrowed his eyes at the courtyard. The room was quite large, with a large round table in the middle. There was a large empty space around it, and all sorts of exquisite decorations. The round table was wide enough to seat 15 to 16 people, but there were only 2 people sitting at the moment. One of them was dressed like a rich man. He wore a silk hat and a jade ring on his finger. After this person saw Fan Xian come in, 2 unusual cold lights began to appear in his extremely ordinary eyes. He looked directly at Fan Xian's face. A moment later, he opened his mouth and said, "Commissioner Fan? I've heard a lot about you, and now that I've seen you today, you're indeed extraordinary." Fan Xian did not immediately respond to this polite greeting. Instead, he thought about it in his heart. All along the way, the Northern Qi Brocade Guard had addressed him by his official title of Commissioner. It seemed that this conversation was between the Overwatch Council and the Brocade Guard, and not a diplomatic negotiation between the royal court. He raised his right hand, and with 2 fingers undid the buckle at his neck, and the thin cloak slid down his back. Wang Qinian was already behind him. Fan Xian sat on the other side of the large round table and looked at the rich man across from him. He noticed that the man's eyebrows were very thick, so thick that they looked like they had been drawn on. He couldn't help but smile. "Master Shen, you look so cold to the world. Why are you so polite to me?" This was the provost of the Northern Qi Brocade Guard, Master Shen Zhong. Shen Zhong controlled countless brocade guards in the north, and was one of the most powerful figures in the world. Fan Xian had not expected him to look so ordinary. If it weren't for the extremely detailed records of this man in the Overwatch Council's files, Fan Xian would not have been able to recognize him. "I'm not being polite," Provost Shen sighed. Looking at Fan Xian's delicate face, he couldn't help but shake his head. "Master Fan, you are famous throughout the world for your poetry. I, as an uncouth old man, admire you greatly. I didn't expect to suddenly receive news in the last 2 months that Fan Xian, the immortal poet, has become the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. This I really don't understand. What is old Mr. Chen thinking? How could someone like Master Fan live like rats in the sewers like us?" Fan Xian chuckled. "Master Shen, you are too modest. I have traveled thousands of miles to become an official for the sake of wealth. No matter what I do, first, it is to benefit the court, and second, nothing more than to find a place for my family to live." These words were a bit blunt, and Shen Zhong sighed in his heart. He couldn't help but look down on this colleague of his from the south. After all, he was a young man, and his words and actions were a bit crude. He really didn't know what Chen Pingping was thinking, and he didn't know why the terrifying Emperor of the South would agree to the Overwatch Council's seemingly absurd personnel arrangement. In truth, as the provost of the Northern Qi Brocade Guard, Shen Zhong had always felt an indescribable admiration for his colleagues in the South. As for the crippled man in the wheelchair, he was even more respectful and fearful. He still couldn't understand how his counterparts in the South could obtain the Qing Emperor's complete trust, unlike him, who stood shakily in court and didn't know which day he would be thrown away like a pair of broken shoes by the people in the palace. Shen Zhong immediately came to his senses. He knew why Fan Xian, as the head of the envoy, had taken the risk of meeting him through Chang Ningho. There was a huge profit to be made in this transaction. Shen Zhong couldn't help but be tempted, and the palace couldn't help but be tempted. When it comes to things like gold and silver, no one would complain about having too much. Shen Zhong suddenly smiled. "It's just that I can't see how the provost can benefit from this." Fan Xian waved his hand, and Wang Qinian and the 7 tiger guards left. Shen Zhong nodded, and the rest of the people in the hall also left. Fan Xian looked at the man sitting next to Shen Zhong with some surprise. He was dressed luxuriously, but he didn't have the royal air that Fan Xian was familiar with. It seemed that he wasn't someone sent by the royal palace of Northern Qi to listen in. So why did he have the right to continue sitting here? "This is Master Cui," Shen Zhong introduced. Master Chui stood up and bowed to Fan Xian, but there was a hint of pride on his face. Fan Xian frowned. A man of the Qin kingdom? Shen Zhong laughed heartily and said, I thought the two of you already knew each other. Commissioner Fan, this Master Chui is the second son of the Chui clan of the Qin kingdom. The Chui clan and the Fan clan have always been on par, and both are sons of noble families. Fan Xian frowned. Master Shen, what do you mean by this? A sinister look flashed through Shen Zhong's eyes. Master Fan, didn't you want to talk business? In fact, I've been doing this business for many years, so I want to know if Master Fan has any more benefits for me. Fan Xian tilted his head slightly and looked at Master Chui, trying to read his face. Suddenly, he asked, Master Chui, did you come to this banquet of your own accord, or did your family elders ask you to come? How could I miss such a grand event? Master Chui didn't seem to be afraid of Fan Xian. Things had become very clear. This Master Chui was clearly representing the interests of the Chui clan, and behind the Chui clan was the eldest princess, who was far away in Xinyang. It wasn't that Fan Xian hadn't considered the possibility that the eldest princess had relied on smuggling to obtain so much profit from the palace treasury. But he hadn't expected that the provost of the brocade guard would pull the eldest princess's representative to the table. What made Fan Xian even angrier was that this rascal Chui actually dared to sit at the table and act as a bargaining chip for the other party. The eldest princess had a favor to ask of Fan Xian, so it was impossible for her to interfere in his affairs. It must have been this rascal Chui acting on his own. Fan Xian had taken the initiative to contact Shen Zhong. On one hand, he wanted to build a connection, but on the other hand, he wanted to attack Xinyang's source of income. He hadn't expected the Northern Qi kingdom to play such a trick. What should have been a game of secret bidding had been brought out into the open. As if sensing his displeasure, Shen Zhong smiled and said, Master Fan, there is no harm in being frank. We are all people who want to make a fortune. This Master Chui and you are planning to do business in a way that overlaps, and I cannot eat both sides. Naturally, I would like to hear your opinion. Fan Xian regained his composure. He looked at Master Chui. I didn't expect Master Chui to have the guts to make such a big deal. How could I compare to Master Fan's guts? Master Chui smiled. Shen Zhong saw that the situation was a little awkward. He smiled. Master Chui is also the son of a noble family. His family has several high-ranking officials in the southern court, but he is currently traveling. One day, he will enter the court as an official. You two should get to know each other. Hearing this, Fan Xian laughed coldly to himself. He looked at Shen Zhong. Master Shen, perhaps you've forgotten who I am. I really don't care about noble families, or whatever. Having said this, Fan Xian stood up. Without saying a word, he left the hall. Wang Qinian had already received him with an umbrella. 7 tiger guards gripped the hilts of their long swords in their hands. They escorted Fan Xian out of the courtyard. Along the way, none of the brocade guards dared to stop them. All they heard was the soft sound of a carriage outside the courtyard. Fan Xian had left so rudely. As if he hadn't expected Fan Xian to have such an intense reaction, Shen Zhong stood rooted to the ground. He had been immersed in officialdom for decades, and had seen all kinds of negotiations. But he had never encountered a situation like this. The way this young Commissioner Fan did things was far beyond anyone's expectations. He turned his head and smiled warmly. Master Chui, this Master Fan is a man of character. Master Chui's face turned red and green. Fan Xian's words had greatly hurt his self-esteem. What noble families! How could Fan Xian say he didn't care about them? He thought angrily, what is the Fan family? He drank a cup of wine to drown his sorrows. In his heart, he felt that something was wrong. Shen Zhong looked at him, not saying a word. Suddenly, Master Chui's hands began to tremble. He remembered Fan Xian's identity as an Overwatch Council member, and that he was, after all, the son-in-law of the eldest princess. His face turned pale with fright. He looked at Shen Zhong again, his eyes filled with hatred. He cursed. Master Shen, you tricked me into coming here. Do you want me to die? Chapter 224. The night rain fell on foreign soil, making a familiar pitter-patter. Fan Xian took a sip of tea and said to Wang Qinian, "Write a secret letter immediately. Have the council investigate the relationship between the Chui clan and Xinyang." Wang Qinian looked at him and said quietly, "We cannot touch the eldest princess. Of course I know we cannot touch her." Fan Xian knew that the things that the eldest princess had done were actually all tacitly approved by the emperor. But today's unfriendly meeting with Shen Zhong only strengthened a certain idea in Fan Xian's heart. "I just want to find out how much power Xinyang has in the court." "Yes." Wang Qinian agreed and continued, "Master Chui is still kneeling outside. Sir, do you think we should let him rise? After all, the Chui clan is a large clan in the capital, and there are several high-ranking officials in the court." Fan Xian's eyes were fixed on the intelligence report sent by the council. He ignored Wang Qinian's words. The group of angels were in Shangjing, and before Yan Bingyun returned, Fan Xian did not dare to use the intelligence network in northern Qi. So his source of intelligence had shrunk, which made him very vexed. After a while, he seemed to hear what Wang Qinian said. He said quietly, "Let him kneel. As a citizen of Qing, he is being used by northern Qi. I will teach him a lesson on behalf of my mother-in-law." The rain gradually lessened, dripping down from the eaves. This courtyard was an old building, so the places where the rain fell had sunk slightly. Fan Xian put on a robe and walked out of the room. He looked at Chui kneeling in front of the stone steps and did not speak for a long time. The other members of the diplomatic mission had long since avoided this small courtyard, so it was especially quiet. "You should know very well what you should do if your family still wants to do business in the north." Fan Xian looked coldly at the Sok Chui. "I will spare your life for today. Write a letter to Xinyang. As for how the eldest princess will punish you, that is your business. But while I am in Shangjing, I do not wish to see you sitting with those people from northern Qi." Chui kowtowed heavily, burying his upper body in the puddles on the ground. He trembled and did not dare to speak. "Let me remind you again, I am the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. Even if the eldest princess is protecting you, if I really want the Chui family to suffer, I have many ways to do so." Fan Xian said, "Although this is a very vulgar threat, I think for a stupid person like you, if you don't make it clear, you will still be used as a knife by the northern Qi people next time. That would not be good." Master Chui was still kneeling miserably. At the time, he had woken up in the rear courtyard of Panshan Lin. Only then did he realize how big a mistake he had made. Putting aside Fan Xian's identity as the Overwatch Council that everyone feared, he was the son-in-law of the eldest princess. In Fan Xian's eyes, Master Chui was at most an ant. Today, he had acted on his own to see what the Overwatch Council wanted to do with northern Qi. Originally, he had considered the issue from the eldest princess's point of view. But if Fan Xian really wanted to deal with him, he feared that the eldest princess would not bother to protect him. Given Fan Xian's current power and influence, aristocratic families were really not worth his attention. Let's put it plainly. Fan Xian looked at him. "You work for the eldest princess. Naturally, I will not make things difficult for you. But right now I want to do something, so I hope you can see the situation clearly." "Yes, Master Fan," Master Chui said in a trembling voice. "I have made a mistake. We are all officials of the kingdom of Qing. No matter what happens in the court, once we leave the country, we must remember that you and I are both citizens of Qing. Do not let outsiders laugh at us. This is what angers me the most." After this little interlude, Xinjiang carefully maintained their respect for the diplomatic mission, and Northern Qi finally felt Fan Xian's power. More accurately, they felt the power of the Overwatch Council of the Southern Court. Shenzhong had always made deals with Xinjiang, so when Fan Xian proposed this deal through Chang Ningho, he did not think much of it. But looking at the current situation, it seemed that the rumors were true. If Fan Xian really did control the palace treasury in the coming year, the eldest princess would lose her power, and Shenzhong's discipline commission would offend Fan Xian, then a large source of income would be cut off. The Northern Qi Palace also knew of this matter. The Empress Dowager fiercely questioned Shenzhong. Shenzhong was full of anxiety. Who would have thought that Commissioner Fan would not even give him a chance to bargain? And the news that Master Cui had knelt at the diplomatic mission that night had also reached the ears of the Brocade Guard. Shenzhong knew that he had to look at Fan Xian in a new light. But no one could have guessed that Fan Xian actually did not want to discuss the deal. A few times, Shenzhong sent people to invite Fan Xian, but Fan Xian coldly pushed them away, as if he did not want to talk. "Sir, what exactly do you want?" Wang Qinian was Fan Xian's most trusted confidant. There were many things that even the Overwatch Council did not know, but Wang Qinian was well aware of them. He knew that Fan Xian had secretly done many things to deal with the eldest princess of Xinjiang, but the eldest princess did not seem to have noticed. But now, Fan Xian looked as if he wanted to reconcile with the eldest princess. This puzzled Wang Qinian. "I want everyone to not know what I want to do." Fan Xian straightened his clothes. Without turning his head, he said quietly, "The eldest princess has a favor to ask of me. Naturally, I want to take advantage of this opportunity to gain some benefit." Wang Qinian still did not understand, and Fan Xian did not explain further. That afternoon, a carriage entered the diplomatic mission's encampment through a corner gate. The carriage looked very shabby and ordinary. Whether it was the carriage's decoration or the coachman's appearance, there was nothing out of the ordinary about it. But everyone in charge of the diplomatic mission's security could clearly feel the tension inside. Outside, the shadows of the Northern Qi Brocade Guard could be seen everywhere. Fan Xian looked at the carriage and said something that seemed completely unrelated to the current situation. "It seems Si Lily has also arrived in Shangjing." A young man in a white robe pushed open the carriage door and slowly moved forward. He stood there, looking at the sky above his head. He narrowed his eyes slightly, and then lowered his head to look at the people in the courtyard who were looking at him. He could easily sense the smell of the courtyard from these people, and he could not help but smile faintly. Fan Xian walked forward and condescendingly took Yan Bingyun's uninjured right hand. He carefully helped him out of the carriage and said quietly, "Welcome home." For the people of Qing, the diplomatic mission's location was like their homeland. Yan Bingyun had been imprisoned for a year, and had long since prepared to die. Although he still could not accept the agreement to trade Xiao En for himself, now that he had set foot on the diplomatic mission's grounds and heard Fan Xian's words of welcome home, he could not help but feel moved. There were no civil officials from the office of the Grand Herald in the courtyard. Aside from the 7 Tiger Guards, everyone else was an official of the Overwatch Council hidden within the diplomatic mission. They all looked at this young man, who had difficulty walking, and bowed in unison. "Greetings, Master Yan." Their voices were not impassioned, nor were they loud, but their sincerity could be felt. Yan Bingyun smiled and said nothing. He only said quietly, "I am very surprised to be able to come out alive." Fan Xian held his hand and laughed. "I am also surprised that your fingernails were not completely pulled out." These 2 future deputy heads of the Overwatch Council spoke very softly, and only they could hear each other. Yan Bingyun returned to the diplomatic mission. His mission to Northern Qi was half complete. Fan Xian felt reassured. He said a few words to Wang Qinian, then helped Yan Bingyun into the inner chamber. Take off your clothes. I didn't hold back. It was clear that Yan Bingyun would not misunderstand anything. He slowly tore off his white clothes, revealing his well-proportioned naked body. Fan Xian raised his eyebrows. He thought of how he had felt when he had changed clothes in the capital's third bureau. He found that Yan Bingyun was indeed much calmer than he was. He took out a box of medicine from a box and used his fingers to pick out some, then began to evenly apply it to Yan Bingyun's body. Wherever his fingers passed, the wounds rose and fell. The horror of the wounds was indescribable. I always thought you were just a lucky man, Yan Bingyun said coldly. Yan Bingyun said coldly, but for Commissioner Fan to be able to remain so calm after seeing my wounds, it seems that you are much stronger than I thought. Fan Xian's fingers stopped at the left side of Yan Bingyun's chest. The bones there had clearly been reattached after they had been broken. There was a large bulge, and on the outside was light red new skin. It looked very ugly. That's because you don't understand how I grew up. I thought I understood it very well. Yan Bingyun looked into his eyes coldly. Master Fan, I understand your life from the time you were born to the age of 12. Fan Xian tilted his head slightly and looked at him. He said nothing. Yan Bingyun sank into silence as well. It seemed he did not want to continue this topic. After a while, he said, "Thank you, Master, for treating my wounds. But I think I should be better at making medicine than you are. In a moment, please allow me to write down a prescription and have the diplomatic mission help me get a few doses of medicine." Fan Xian ignored him. He continued to apply the medicine, complementing it with the healing methods he had learned since childhood. Eat him. Fan Xian unceremoniously stuffed a pill into Yan Bingyun's mouth. He said coldly, "When it comes to treating wounds and detoxifying poisons, there is no one in this world who dares to clamor in front of me." Chapter 225. Who's Fei Ti? Who else in the council is named Fei? Sir, are you talking about old Fei? I'm talking about that old freak. Fan Xian had finished everything. He called for someone to bring in a basin of warm water. He carefully washed his hands and pulled off a piece of fur to dry them. Then he said to Yan Bingyun, "You've been tortured for too long. Your heart has been injured and your martial arts training has been greatly damaged." After saying this, he carefully observed Yan Bingyun's expression. He found that Yan Bingyun's face was calm, as if he hadn't heard anything. He couldn't help but sigh in admiration. He had made up his mind to take this seemingly cold, but actually extremely arrogant young man into his fold. "After you return home, take good care of yourself. It's not like you can't be cured. If your nails are pulled out, they'll grow back. If your bones are dislocated, I'll have the bald man from the 7th Bureau break them again. I'll treat you again. I can't let you become an old cripple like Chen Pingping." Fan Xian joked, but Yan Bingyun felt a bit strange. The entire Overwatch Council had spies all over the world, and not a single one of them dared to call Director Chen an old cripple in front of others. Yan Bingyun slowly narrowed his eyes, as if trying to see the truth behind this matter. For example, why was Fan Xian already the commissioner of the Overwatch Council at such a young age? Right at this moment, a burning sensation rose from his chest and abdomen. Even though his temperament was incomparably firm, he was still shaken by this sudden pain, and the corner of his eyebrows twitched a little. "It's nothing. It's just a method to force out the poison. Because I don't know what poison is in your body, the medicine I used was a bit too strong. But with me watching, you won't die." Fan Xian didn't care and helped him put on his clothes. Sweat beaded on Yan Bingyun's forehead. It was obvious he was in great pain. In a low voice he said, "Damn, this is worse than being poisoned. What kind of antidote is this?" Fan Xian was overjoyed. He clapped his hands and praised, Brother Yen, you're finally willing to curse. That's right. Who are you always putting on that cold face for? You can act cool in front of the Northern Chi brocade guards, but don't do it in front of me. I've seen it since I was little. What he had seen since he was little was naturally that cool Uncle Zhu. Who did you learn this antidote from? I don't trust you. Yen Bingyun asked coldly as he felt the area of his body that was smeared with ointment start to burn. As I said earlier. Fan Xian looked at him with a smile. A strange light flashed in Yen Bingyun's eyes. Forgetting all the pain inside and outside of his body, he hissed, "You are Fei Jie's disciple?" His voice was full of surprise. "Fei Jie doesn't have a disciple like you. You even boasted that you knew everything about me before I was 12. Fan Xian began to tidy up the bottles by the bed. "You don't even know who my teacher is," he said mockingly. Yen Bingyun looked at him and did not speak for a long time. Fan Xian looked back at him innocently. He rested his chin on his hand and looked at the worms all over Master Yan's body. "I say, Brother Yen," he said quietly, "why do I feel like you look at me with anger?" This was a thorn in Fan Xian's heart. Since he wanted to subdue Yen Bingyun, he had to know why he had such strong feelings of resistance toward him. Otherwise, his days in the future would be difficult. There was a long silence. Yen Bingyun still did not seem to want to talk about this topic. But for some reason, as the burning pain inside and outside of his body gradually faded, the head of the Overwatch Council in the north began to feel dizzy. Looking at Fan Xian's beautiful face, he felt an inexplicable hatred. He thought of the exciting life he had led in the Northern Chi court these years, and his words seemed to escape from his dry lips. "Commissioner, I don't know if you still remember that there was a murder case in Danzhou 5 years ago. It has never been solved." Fan Xian's hand, which was in the middle of closing the box, did not stop. He was slightly surprised. Of course he remembered that murder case. It was the first time Fan Xian had killed someone in his 2 lives. Even now, the cold chestnut that had burst out of the assassin's throat seemed to be stimulating Fan Xian's palm. "I know what you're talking about." Fan Xian frowned. "What does this have to do with you and me?" Yen Bingyun smiled strangely. "That assassin was under the jurisdiction of the 4th Bureau. It was because of this that I was chased north to be a rat." "So you hate me?" Fan Xian sank into silence. After a while, he suddenly laughed with extreme pleasure. "I thought you should thank me." "Why?" Yen Bingyun's dizziness faded a little. After a moment of surprise, he returned to his cold demeanor. Fan Xian stared into his eyes and enunciated each word clearly. "Because I can see that you were born to be a spy. You like this kind of life. I think these 4 years of hiding in Northern Chi, nervous and uneasy day and night, have been a very exciting and fulfilling life for you." Yen Bingyun said, "If you like it, sir, you can try it." Fan Xian smiled and picked up the medicine box. Like a doctor, he walked out of the side room and closed the door behind him. He gave a barely noticeable shrug and scraped the drug out of his fingernails into the corner of the box. He warned himself in his heart that he would only use the drug on one of his own people once. There would be no next time. Yen Bingyun was indeed powerful. Under the effects of chloroform, he was able to wake up immediately. If he knew that Fan Xian had used this trick, it would be difficult for the 2 of them to get along. Hearing this story from Yen Bingyun made Fan Xian feel touched. At the same time, he knew the real reason why Yen Bingyun disliked him. Fan Xian felt very comforted. He did not think that he and Yen Bingyun had such a strange history. 5 years ago, because of the attempted murder in Danzhou, Yen Bingyun was chased to the north and became the head spy of the Overwatch Council in Northern Chi. 5 years later, it was Fan Xian who had come to bring him back. Thinking of this, Fan Xian couldn't help but smile. In this world, who knew when it would come back to haunt him? "Sir, Boss Xing is here with wine," a subordinate reported. Fan Xian waved his hand. "Take it." I don't want to see him. The subordinate acknowledged and went out. Fan Xian frowned. He had just lectured Master Cui, and now there was a letter from Xinyang. That eldest princess was really hot on his heels. As he was thinking this, Wang Qinian came in from outside. He held a letter in his hand. A letter from Xing Huairan. Fan Xian tore open the seal and read it carefully. A look of worry appeared on his face. What are these people playing at? He raised his eyebrows and went into the backyard. Yan Bingyun was very alert. When Fan Xian opened the door, his hand had already touched the knife at his side. Relax a little. Fan Xian looked at him, whose eyes were still closed. No one will try to assassinate you here. Yan Bingyun slowly opened his eyes and looked at Fan Xian's face. A cold look flashed through his eyes. What medicine did you give me? Why do I feel dizzy? I used some medicine to calm the mind, Fan Xian explained calmly. Fan Xian calmly explained, your spirit has been greatly depleted. If you want to recover as soon as possible, then you need a good night's sleep. I just didn't expect that your body's muscles would be able to resist the medicine. It's not very useful. What a pity. These light words covered up the earlier matter of the knockout drug. Fan Xian's delicate and untainted face was indeed the best disguise for crafty plots and conspiracies. Yan Bingyun knew that Fan Xian had entered the room because he had something to ask. His gaze fell on Fan Xian's hand. He frowned. Sir Fan, what is it? Fan Xian shook the letter in his hand and smiled. A letter from the eldest princess. Yan Bingyun was a little surprised, but he didn't show it on his face. What does this have to do with me? Before you return to the capital, you are still the commander of the Overwatch Council's spies in northern Qi. Fan Xian smiled. So when the court wants to do something, I have to ask for your opinion. Please speak, sir. Yan Bingyun didn't change his expression. After Fan Xian had explained the contents of the 2 consecutive letters from Xinyang, Yan Bingyun furrowed his brows. There were a few strands of silver between his brows. He appeared weak. In a quiet voice he asked, Why does the eldest princess care about these things? I only came to ask for your opinion. Should the council intervene in this matter? Fan Xian said. Yan Bingyun shook his head. The council wants Xiao En dead, but the eldest princess wants us to cooperate with Shang Shanhu to rescue Xiao En. These are 2 opposing goals. How can we cooperate? Fan Xian sat down and looked at Yan Bingyun's cold face. Let's not discuss this for now. I need to know from your mouth what the current situation in northern Qi is like. Yan Bingyun looked at him and held up 3 fingers. 3 sides. One side is the Empress Dowager, one side is the Emperor, and one side is Shang Shanhu. But since Shang Shanhu has been moved back to Shangjing, his power has been greatly damaged. He must choose between the Empress Dowager and the Emperor. It was a simple and crude statement, but it was a confident judgment. Fan Xian silently signaled for him to continue. Yan Bingyun continued. According to what you say, if Xiao En is Shang Shanhu's adoptive father, and Imperial Advisor Ku he wants Xiao En dead, then in the end, Shang Shanhu will definitely side with the Emperor. Why? Because the Empress Dowager will certainly listen to Ku he. Fan Xian unconsciously raised his eyebrows. The Empress Dowager is indeed quite young, but does Imperial Advisor Ku he still have such thoughts? Yan Bingyun was stunned. It took him a moment to realize that this young man, who was beautiful on the outside but extremely wretched on the inside, had misunderstood his meaning. He looked at Fan Xian with disdain. Things are not what you think. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.